I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco.
Here.
Hotchkiss.
Here.
House. Rouse. Here. Self.
Here.
White. Here. Mayor Schneider. Here. Item 1, Employee Recognition Service Award pins.
Yes, Mayor Schneider and members of the City Council, as you know, every month we present service award pins to employees who are celebrating important milestones with the city. And I want to read their names into the record. And I'm not sure I see, we were going to have one employee here. But anyway, the other employees, with 5 years, Graciela Reynoso, who's the HR analyst in admin services. Liz Stotts, who I think you all know is in community development and is a community development program specialist. John Nelson, police officer. Justin Berman, parking coordinator in public works. Ariana Castellanos, who's a parking coordinator. And Johnny Salas, who's an assistant parking coordinator. With 10 years, Brian Jensen, police officer. Christina Ortega, who's also a police officer. Kevin Ryan, police officer. With 15 years, Sue Gray, who's the Administrative Services Manager in Community Development. Susan Gantz, Planning Technician 2 in Community Development. And Mike Eulemeyer, who's an ID tech in the Police Department. With 20 years, Annalisa Hoods, who's Administrative Specialist in the PD. Ed Olson, who's a police sergeant and is hiding in the corner there, back there. And Paul Rodriguez, who's a senior airport maintenance worker. With 25 years, Stephen Berman, who's a fire captain. Brian Porter is also a fire captain. Michael Gordon, who's a water distribution operator technician in Public Works, who was going to be here. It looks like he didn't make it. And Terry Gibson, who's the airport marketing coordinator. And with 35 years, Alvin James, who's a fire engineer in the fire department.
Pretty impressive. We'll make sure they get their pins and everything. So, thank you. Changes to the agenda.
Madam Mayor, there's one, and that is we're going to pull off the item 10, which is conference with labor negotiators, since we dealt with that yesterday.
Okay. And also item 13, it's a personnel public employee performance evaluation is not quite complete yet, so we'll just move that to next week. I think 12 is okay, though. Okay. Okay, public comment. I have a couple of speaker slips here and 2 minutes up on the podium. We'll have Kenneth Locke, followed by I, the person.
My name is Kenneth Locke. I want to comment concerns your contributions that you make to the art community. I have a sign that I just did. It's actually somebody wanted to buy this from me. It's kind of funny. But it's Idiots Buy Stupid Art. And as I was mentioning last time I spoke about this economy being adrift, when it comes to the art market and your support, the Arts Commission for art and the community, I'm sorry to inform you that what you actually do is promote mental illness and actually debase, say, the currency with one stone, say. Let's see, mental illness. It's delusional. You're promoting delusional thinking in relation to the product of art. And it's just kind of funny in this art market, it actually looks for people who are mentally unstable and who's producing stuff, and that actually then they become popular, and then their price of their works goes up. There was a self-portrait of Andy Warhol that somebody put in there somewhere and then brought it to the market that they bought for like $1,200, and it turned out to be they sold it for millions of dollars. A self-portrait of Andy Warhol, who actually did not make any contribution to the art, to like the abstract or anything to humanity, but for some reason or another, the art community values his work, and then the whole basis of the debasing of the value of the dollar is that they actually turn a delusional object of art into millions of dollars. It's completely delusional. Thank you.
That's it for public comment. Nope, there you are. I was just about to close public comment. So if you want to speak now, speak now.
Mayor Schneider, members of the Santa Barbara School, I'm sorry, just a sec. I need to get on the right page. Mayor Schneider, members of the Santa Barbara School, members of the Santa Barbara City Council. You are the head of the body politic. You are the collective brain. Yet you are derelict in your duties. You are blind to our suffering. You are deaf to our outrage. We, the people of Santa Barbara, in order to form a more perfect community, in order to expose deep-seated and widespread school and government corruption, to reform education and restore justice and democracy in our schools and community, to establish the rights and responsibilities of parents, teachers, and students so that we may learn and grow together, to create an educational system that nurtures and engages our children's minds, bodies, and spirits, and empowers parents to communicate, collaborate, coordinate, and cooperate as educational partners, to provide for the common defense and advocacy of sane practices and democratic policies that support family values, promote domestic harmony, and ensure social justice, and reweave the fabric of our society and thereby secure the blessings of love, health, and happiness for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. We do hereby pledge to expose the education politico-industrial complex called the EPIC, to reverse the school-to-prison pipeline, and establish democratic education within a properly structured school system, and to expose government corruption so that we may reform our government and have community again. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes public comments. Onto the consent calendar. I don't think there are any items to read. Anyone need to pull anything off the consent calendar, or is there a motion to accept it? Going
Madam Mayor, move
Yes.
the consent calendar.
Okay, moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Thank you. Report from the Finance Committee, Mr. Francisco.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the Finance Committee met today, and we recommended that approximately $850,000 worth of HRLP, Housing Rehabilitation Loan Program money, be granted to the Housing Authority for 3 projects. We also heard reports on fee increases in various city departments, and of course all that information will be coming to the full council during budget deliberations.
Okay, thank you. Item number 7.
Street parking determination for Brinkerhoff Avenue.
Okay, I think, Mr. Allen, you're going to introduce this topic, and then I'm sure I have plenty of, there they are, public speaker slips.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Browning Allen, the Transportation Manager in the Public Works Department. What this item is a request from the residents who live on Brinkerhoff Avenue to make the temporary one-waying of Brinkerhoff and the diagonal parking permanent. They have submitted a petition to the city that was taken to the city's Transportation Circulation Committee on March 10th. The TCC did hear from the residents that were in attendance and did vote to recommend to council to make this configuration permanent. We also took it to the Historic Landmarks Commission the end of March, and the HLC had some concerns about the historical nature of the parking and continued the item indefinitely. So the reason we had this before the council today is to get direction from the city council as to the residents' request to make this temporary configuration permanent. Just to let you know, our transportation engineer, we have taken a look at this, and from a transportation standpoint, we don't have any issues with making this permanent. If the council direction is to return it back to its original configuration, that's not a problem either way. So we are really looking from direction from the city council with regards to this in response to the request from the residents. I'll leave it at that. I have some pictures of what it would look like on a temporary basis, but I think maybe more appropriate to hear from the residents, at least first, to hear why they want this made permanent. Then I can answer any questions that the council might have and kind of close the loop after the residents have expressed their interest. If that's okay with you, Madam Mayor?
I'm sorry?
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, we could hear from the public first and see if there's any we'll go from there. We have quite a few. I was looking at the slips because people are yielding time to others, and I wanted to not repeat your names twice. So we'll start with the comments from the public, and Barbara Primo. And is Judy Yee here? You are, and you're giving your 2 minutes to Barbara, correct? Okay. Well, there it is. You got 4. There you go.
Madam Mayor and Honorable City Council, we
Want to move that mic right to your, there you go. There you go.
there's 17 structures on the street, houses and businesses, and 16 of us are we want it to stay, because for a year it's not like we are going to test it. We've tested it for a year and a half, and it works beautifully. The street looks better. Some people might think it doesn't, but it looks better. It's safer. It's quieter. It's just, I just implore you to vote for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Primo, be followed by Fermina Murray. We're back down to 2 minutes here.
Mayor, City Council, I had planned to revert to some talk about the lights shining into homes from the way it's parked now. I've sent each one of you pictures and my letter explaining the way it is, so I'm not going to talk about that right now. Both residents and businesses have sent letters to the council rebutting the negatives outlined in letters of those against diagonal parking, and I hope common sense prevails. The majority of the residents, including business owners, have expressed what and why we want the street to remain one-way south with diagonal parking. All the facts have been given to you via emails, letters, pictures, storyboards, and verbally. The council was elected by the majority vote of the public. We wish the same for the majority of those living and working on Brinkerhoff Avenue. We are willing to wait for funds to finish whatever needs to be done. I do not understand why an environmental review is needed, since we've been living with this diagonal parking for a year and a half. Striping diagonal lines and making the street one-way south does not, in my mind, affect the environment. This arrangement opens the street much prettier, makes it safer for everyone getting in and out of their vehicles, provides safe parking for delivery vehicles, provides additional parking stalls for businesses. We now have 9 of them on our street, as well as for the visitors and residents. Our street is beautiful because the care of the owners and businesses given to each property. This street is mixed use. Diagonal parking benefits us all. Thank you.
Fermina Murray will be followed by, I think it's Barry Werwick. Right. Hello.
Hello, Mayor Snyder. I'm a member of the HLC. I'm not here to represent all of the HLC members because in our last meeting there was not a direction to send a representative. So I am speaking as one voice from the landmarks. What we look at is we are bounded, the HLC is bounded by the design guidelines of the EPV and also the master environmental documents that we look at to interpret historical matters. Now, with when this came before the HLC, I had spoken because the parallel parking, which used to exist in the Brinkerhoff district, had been there for 50 years or more. This is the threshold to which we look at a cumulative historical character of a neighborhood. And also, when we look all over the city, there is not an example of an angled parking in all of the residential neighborhoods in all of Santa Barbara, from the Riviera all the way to the west east. Now, people mentioned, well, this is also a commercial zone, so, you know, it should have angled parking is okay for commercial. Yes, that is true. But primarily the homes are historical and they are also primarily homes, they're residential homes. Now, when we look for examples of commercial areas, let's say in the Sola area, east and west of Sola, Arriega, Mitchell-Torina, there are businesses that are housed in, residential-style homes. Now, those also have homes and business, and from, let's say, the 200 to the 400 blocks of these areas show that there are businesses who are also abide by this parallel parking, which is cumulatively a character of our neighborhoods. You know, the Apam Hotel, also another sort of Victorian-style building. So from this kind of considered overall sense of the history of the neighborhoods, we feel strongly that the parallel parking is a character of the cityscape, the feel of the neighborhood, the kind of feature that gives you that sense of visual feature of the neighborhood that has existed for at least 50 years or more.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Francisco has a question for you.
Yes. Mrs. Murray, this just occurred to me. I'm sorry I didn't think of this earlier, but I realize that this is a landmark district, not a designated historic district. But do you know, is there a period of significance associated with Brinkerhoff?
Yes, there is. From probably from the 1880s on, when the buildings got built and the whole neighborhood got started. Now, when we go back and look at the status of Brinkerhoff when it became a landmark status since the 60s. So when we look at those kind of things, we take in consideration the period of significance. Now, if you take that period of significance, you're saying, oh, buggies and carriages. So we're not talking about that. We're also talking about change. We're not saying change is not good or anything. We are looking at the overall streetscape and cumulative impact of what has existed that makes a neighborhood familiar, and it's a feature of the neighborhood. And that's what we look at. And when we look at all of the neighborhoods, not just Brinkerhoff, it's all parallel parking. That is the character of Santa Barbara. And so it's out of that whole sort of looking at everything that we then look at that sense. It's not out of capriciousness. I fully respect the neighbors and their recommendations, but as a historian on the landmark, my task as also architectural historian, I have to look into all those historical merits of the neighborhood and all of our guidelines. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service on HLC. Barry Winwick, if you could correct me, please, followed by
Sure.
Tim Bunyak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I will go ahead and correct members of the council. It's Barry Winnick.
Thank you.
I'm an architect with a practice on Brinkerhoff Avenue. Actually, I have the pleasure to be there. I've been there a couple of years now. So I'm one of those 9 professionals or businesses that were listed by one of the previous speakers. And my office has there's about 5 of us, and there's also a colleague of mine who's not here today who also shares office space, and that's Kate Dole of Kate Dole Landscaping, and I believe she wrote a letter to the council as well. So I really have 2 reflections. One is kind of human nature, and I'm in favor of the project, by the way, of keeping the parking the way it is with the angled parking. So anyway, the human nature side of it is, for me, is when the bridge project was first started, and they were preparing us for the change in the neighborhood, that we would have to change from the parallel parking to all kinds of disruption, what have you. Of course, I was totally against it, thinking like, oh, this is going to be perfectly mismanaged. And in fact, I was so wrong. And, as an architect, I watch a lot of construction. And I was incredibly impressed by how well managed it was and how well prepared we were. And, in fact, how much more pleasant Brinkerhoff became by having angled parking rather than the sort of constant maneuvering of parallel parked cars on either side of the street. So that's just the first part, was that, I was resistant to change, and now I see it. And as one of the other previous speakers spoke, we've been practicing this for a year and a half, and it's worked incredibly well. The second part is about finding what's historically significant. And my practice has gone from the East Coast out here to the West Coast. Once upon a time, I did historic preservation work. Currently, I do private homes and restaurants and commercial structures. I also had the great privilege of working on the Coral Casino renovation project when I first came to town. And this is very relevant.
You wind up, though, please.
I'll wrap it up really fast. Anyway, what happened is we had to find when the historically defining feature of that building was. What time in history should we say this is significant and this isn't? And there are many places and points that one would take. I would say for Brinkerhoff, the historically defining period of time is prior to the car, right? So that's what's being revealed now. This is what I just want to say, is that you see more of the buildings now than you did before.
Okay,
so
thank
anyway,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Bynak, gosh, I can't pronounce anyone's name
It's
today.
Bynak. You
Thank
just
you.
divide it in half. and
Followed
it's
by
real
George
simple,
Ogle.
Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, members of the council, I am Tim Bynak. I'm in favor of the diagonal parking. My wife and I own 3 structures, 3 buildings on Brinkerhoff. We've been on the street since the late 70s. This is a great neighborhood. These are great people that you have in this neighborhood. They really care about this neighborhood. They have parties. They know one another by their first names. You can see, every time something's come up, hey, the group comes out and it comes together. I would hope that you recognize that, and it's their neighborhood, and that you continue with the diagonal parking. This is a C2 zone. My wife and I are the people with the neighbors that came forward. I led the landmark district. Sheila Lodge was mayor at that particular point in time. My wife and I were in our early 30s. We stand up here and shook. Are we going to really do this here and put it together? We came from back east, and so we want a little bit of, that history preserved as far as Brinkerhoff was concerned. The reasoning, the real reason that pushed my wife and I was the karate studio that came down on Delavina and went, boundary to boundary is a C2 zone. And we just could see that there's going to be parking in front yards and all kinds of other things that was going to happen on Brinkerhoff. And we wanted to move forward to preserve the neighborhood. Currently, there is a lot more openness that occurs, and that's what I think that we were going for when I stood up here and we went through all the hearings about the district at that point in time. We're not like all of Santa Barbara with the diagonal or with the lateral parking that occurs. The period of time is before the automobile, so we're dealing with the automobile, as a intrusion as far as the the district was concerned, and that was the concern, is to try to keep it as open as we possibly could.
Wind up,
Safety
please.
is an important point, and as far as traffic flow is concerned, I think these all work towards keeping it in the way that it is at the present time.
Thank you.
So I want the neighborhood to prosper. I hope you allow the neighborhood to prosper, and I hope you have the courage to just keep going with what the neighbors want. It's very democratic. Thank you.
Okay. George Ogle will be followed by Carl Hightower.
Obviously, my name is George Ogle, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Welcome to Parking Wars. I have consulted the spiritual part of my house, my spiritual entity, Lord Harry, and he's in favor of having the diagonal parking with the one-way going the other way. Because when he originally had the house, guess what? There wasn't any. I have a picture of my house in 1906, and the car is a 1906 Pierce Arrow, which cost $6,000. The people that lived there were the Hale family. I think the point is the fact that this is a growing entity type of thing, and what used to happen to us, like on a Friday or Saturday night, I'd have people parked in my driveway. Or you wouldn't find a parking place, which meant that you had to go for 10 or 15 minutes to find a parking place because of the liquor establishments in the 400, 500 block and 600 block of State Street. And it kind of continues today because they don't park in the Anacapa parking lot in the 500 block because the police come by there about 2 o'clock in the morning. So on Friday and Saturday nights, it's kind of like a hard parking. It would be helpful if on weekends we had a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. resident-only parking. Thank you very kindly.
Carl Hightower will be followed by Wanda Livernoy.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, really thank you for your endless patience and with all the requests and challenges that you hear from the citizens of Santa Barbara, and appreciate that you're so willingly here to represent us all. At the outset of the Haley Bridge construction, some of us in the neighborhood were somewhat apprehensive about the configuration of the traffic flow and the diagonal parking. We soon became aware of the more practical, safer, and aesthetic conditions that we were given. Some of the diagonal parking on one side and one-way traffic is obvious. Some of the significantly so for children, it's safer, the elderly, older than I am, passengers, and drivers to enter and exit the cars. It enables delivery trucks such as DHL, FedEx, UPSP, and UPS to stop on the west side, permitting cars to pass without hindering the traffic flow. With parallel parking, we've had traffic backed up because there was no room to pass by. Parking spaces are increased from 35 to 41, and many parallel parkers had difficulty in parking in only one car space, so this actually decreased the number of parking spaces. The current parking configuration decreases the speeding of incoming traffic, which was a real safety consideration in the past. There seems to be a slow-down effect on drivers when they see a one-way sign with cars parked diagonally. There's much greater view of houses and gardens with diagonal parking. There's more openness for viewing for those who come to visit our historic area, highly recommended by the city visitor centers. And yes, there is a precedent for parallel parking. I have a photo of 1930, especially in front of the Piggly Wiggly, before any of you were born, of course, or even thought about being born, but I was closer to that.
You do need to wind
it's
up,
an
Mr.
old
Hightower.
photo, if you'd like to see it, with diagonal parking on State Street. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Wanda Livernoy will be followed by Jeannie Cadre.
I'd love to see that photograph.
Mr. Hightower,
Mr. Hightower,
could you hand that?
do you mind just sharing that photo with us? I'd love to see it. Thank you. We'll give it back.
Hi. Thanks for listening to all of the neighbors. The street, the physical street, is not historic. That just makes it so much easier. People never seem to ask, how did it really all happen? part of the reason why and how it all happened is when we came to Santa Barbara in 1966, we had lunch at the Redwood Inn. The House of Danan was operating next door, real mixed use, both of those places. Restaurant down below, they lived upstairs. Beauty shop, they lived upstairs. Mr. Parker across the street was the barber, a living saint and wonderful. And that was mixed use, and that's how it started. C2 property, charming house, good neighborhood. And we have always had fabulous neighbors, I must say. So that's how it all started. Without any of those components, it would not have made it. Now, there are landmark advocates and preservation junkies who like to drive down the street real fast and say, I used to go there, and I used to be here, and I used to do this. Well, we have to be progressive. We have to think of what works now. What do we need now? 7 spaces more isn't a lot unless you get the last one. And then you're saying, thank goodness we had a few more. So I know that the Vasallos have said we did not have any neighborhood meetings. According to the Constitution, anybody can peaceably assemble. Anybody can have a petition. Let's go. Okay? That's it.
Jeannie Cadre will be followed by, now Patricia Robles Morris, you said, give my time to Brinkerhoff speakers. So, to anyone in particular, or some people went over, so, well, if you want to speak, you can, or we'll let it, okay.
Jean Carey from 532 Brinkerhoff, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. I have a 54-year history on Brinkerhoff, and believe me, it does not look now like it did when we bought that old house. And for 3 years, spent almost every weekend working on it, my husband and I. We went into the back studios with a shovel, literally. There has been continual improvement over all of those years, so that when you look at us today, it's like a garden setting. Come enjoy our roses on the block. They're beautiful. We didn't do that by holding still. I was so disappointed in the Historic Landmarks Commission remarks because it sounds like they wanted us to hold still, to stay there. I've done a seismic upgrade on my big old house, and we have all kinds of improvements inside and all kinds of improvements outside, as has everyone else. We are not a static neighborhood who's dying, which you do if you don't make improvements. We're really busy. We're a C2 with 9 or 10 businesses, all kinds of tenants, residences, owners, and so forth, and we really need to continue to improve. You, the city, and the transportation department gave us an improvement that we didn't think we'd like, but we loved. And we'd like to continue that improvement, and I see no reason why we can't. You really don't need an environmental impact. All you need to do is ask the people, us, that have been living with it for a year and a half, what we think of it. We're in the environment, and we like it. Please help us continue it, and thank you.
Mary Robles will be followed by Robert Lavonoy. There's Mary.
Mayor and council members, thank you for the work you do for us. Greatly appreciated. Santa Barbara, like any other city in the country, has financial woes, but we're unique. We work things out. I think we work it out like a family. And Brinkerhoff Avenue has been a family of residents, renters, and businesses. I know my family has been there for 4 generations. The Smocks are there for 5 generations. And we work together. And I think that's why we are successful, because we work as a family. But we also welcome new members all the time. And right now, we need to encourage and to help the businesses on our street. They need easy access parking. And the angle parking has worked beautifully. We lived with it for a year and a half. It worked, and we love it. We don't want these businesses to go to another city. They are an asset to the city of Santa Barbara, and businesses will always need our help to thrive and to succeed. Their success is the success of this city. We also don't want the clients that they have to not come back downtown. They come, they shop, they stay, they go to the market, and that's a good thing. Downtown needs that activity. 2 new restaurants are opening a block away. I think they would appreciate the extra parking. And I think that downtown parking is something that the residents really want, and businesses and visitors want it too, so please keep it. With angled parking, I think we will see that it is a good thing. And I just want to say something. Plymouth, Massachusetts, Hyannisport, Martha's Vineyard, historical cute towns, angled parking. So thank you.
Robert Livernoy, now you have a number of people who, I'm going to put Patricia's name in here. I just saw her. Edward Russell, are you here? Yes. Okay. And I think it's Diane Gullett? Yeah, okay. So, Robert, you have 8 minutes, and I believe you have...
Mayor and council and all, and thank you to my secretary, since I'm inadequate on the machine. But he's going to present a few pictures of Brinkerhoff. It's worked very well. I was opposed in the beginning. It took me no time to determine that it just worked. And there's Judy's house and a couple of ginkgos in parking, and then we'll see some. It's also an urban forest that we've dedicated. We're C2. We're just as C2 as the big places on Chapala. They were forced under duress to stretch 18 inches into 2 feet because the building was 3 stories high. So we don't have any argument with them. I like the building. It's very, very. It's apples and oranges, but our trees and this thing you're seeing is dedicated to not be made into other structures. It's C2 zoning. My house is 2 houses on 1 lot. It's 2,000 square foot total and 7,093. It's going to remain and pump oxygen in the air as long as I'm alive, and I think that you can enforce it if I should die by some thing. Anyway, now I don't think this is necessarily the trees. Are we looking for, now look at the redwood tree, how beautifully it looks down the full length of Brinkerhoff, and how much landscaping there is now and there can be. So we've tried for 45 years. Also, it's all private stuff. We did not suck money from anybody. We didn't have increment money or anything. Everyone was individually developed over a long period of time and paid for, and it's all, as far as I know, private property, and each is owned by a distinct person that cares for their house. That little map I gave you of the times, they've been there since 1940, 1933. I've been there since 1966. The earliest was about 1940 in the same family. So obviously the turnover is that my tenants, attorney, dentist, psychologist, and Bill Dewey, the photographer, all over 25 years. So that's the kind of stability that we think we can offer. We're not flipping properties. I don't flip every 45 years, but it's not an investment to us. It is an investment. It's been a good investment. But that's not the primary reason for Brinkerhoff. It's individually owned and loved. Are we okay? Are we still going?
I just kept going.
Oh, you're all done?
We're on cycle 2, yes, of all the pictures. So
thank you.
They're very nice.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Madam Mayor, I have a question for Mr. Livernoy.
Mr. House, Mr. Livernoy, Mr. House has a, Councilmember House has a question.
Mr.
yes, yes,
Livernoy,
yes.
nice to see you again.
Yes.
A quick question. The city put in some new lighting, not modern lighting, but
Yes,
the
yes,
kind of
yes,
historic kind of lighting there. How do you all like that?
It's beautiful. In fact, these show the 4 lanterns, some of these, and we are, as a dog walking park, it's impossible to get mugged while you walk there.
Okay.
And I think,
Okay.
well, see, I don't worry about me. If I walk with my dog, the big poodle, but Primo over here walks with a little 8-pound dog, and I'm worried about him.
Okay.
No, seriously, I don't know if you can flip to a bunch of lights, but anyway.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Answer? It is wonderful.
Oh, that's great. What a nice way to have a question answered.
Susan Love will be followed by Tony Vasallo.
Honorable Mayor and council members, you all have received letters, my full letter in your email box. I am one of, I believe, 10 businesses and people who own homes on Brinkerhoff. This means that in the C2 zone neighborhood, more than half of those homes have businesses that are run out of them. The diagonal parking consistently gives us more parking. There are the same number of spots every day. It's just that way. One can say on paper that the parallel parking provides 35 spaces, but this is a number that is variable. It can change from day to day. It all depends on how somebody parks or if a large RV takes up 2 to 3 spots, and it's never consistent. There are always fewer spots to park in with that configuration, and the businesses on this street have already suffered through the construction. So please do not have us revert back to another situation that takes us away from our business and your tax dollars. The arguments I've heard about parallel parking being more historic are frankly absurd to me. If we truly want to be historic, we'd go back to the dirt roads and all invest in a horse and buggy. And I think we have to be open to the practical sides of things while we're trying to maintain the historic nature of our street. The pictures I've seen on the council website provided by our one neighbor that doesn't agree with most of us, sadly, I think are ridiculously biased. The perspective that they have been taken from is not at all representative of the street as you've just seen from Robert's pictures. Anyway, I just hope that you will consider this and listen to all of us and keep this parking as is. As a business person, I would like to have more people coming to my business and getting a spot so they can come in. Thank you so much.
Tony Vasallo will be followed by Carolyn Vasallo.
Madam Mayor and council members, for the record, I'm Tony Vasallo, a Brinkerhoff Avenue resident. So, there you have it. Last year, you invested money in historic streetlights, which we all love. That's aimed at preserving the character of the district. I appreciate all the comments being made. The troubling part of this is that the Historic Landmark Commission, the people you put in charge of preserving the district, the people you put in charge of responsible monitoring of the district, made not one single comment in favor of the diagonal parking. So I'm not comfortable with that. I feel that the city should come up with a solution that answers the objections and the concerns of the neighbors, yes, but one that can be supported by the Historic Landmark Commission. Because over time, the neighborhood names and faces will change, but the HLC endures as the commission responsible for providing the professional oversight of the district
if that in fact is what you want to promulgate and promote. I'm sure Public Works, if they're directed, can find some middle ground, satisfy residents and business concerns, and I wholeheartedly support that. But I think it's got to be a solution that the HLC will support as well. We need a win-win for everyone, and believe me, I don't like standing here being on the other side of my neighbor's concerns, but I think there's a better way. I think the style of parking matters. I do think the diagonal parking juxtaposed to 100-year-old residential style buildings looks strange and awkward. I don't think it supports the idea of the traditional nature of the street. Thank you.
Carolyn Vassallo will be followed by Kellum DeForest, and the final speaker will be Dana Longo.
Go ahead. Madam Mayor and members of the City Council, my name is Caroline Vassallo, and I live at 514 Brinkerhoff. I am in full support of the HLC comments to reject diagonal parking. In the early 1980s, one of today's petitioners published a Brinkerhoff business brochure stating, quote, Brinkerhoff Avenue alone reflects the area's turn-of-the-century visual character, and for that reason it has been designated a special historic district, unquote. So for over 30 years or more, the HLC has protected this visual character, and certainly now when you do not allow the commercialization of big box stores in Santa Barbara, I would find it sharply inconsistent to allow the diagonal strip commercial parking of 41 vehicles in one block honored with landmark status. Several years back, close to 100% of the Brinkerhoff residents fought the two large condos on Chapala Street, both of which have been approved. Those condos may minimize views a little bit, but now they also highlight the different qualities of Brinkerhoff's smaller cottages and spaces against the large Spanish colonial. So actually I think it works. The condos do not harm the essence of Brinkerhoff, but in contrast, the change to diagonal parking alters the very heart of Brinkerhoff's charm. According to urban historian Jake Jacobus, it significantly, I'm quoting him, it significantly changes the spatial relationship of Brinkerhoff's original design plan, which was an open room look with the cottages at the ends and on the sides, and then the open space with the parallel streets, sidewalks, and so forth. The dense and continuous 41-vehicle parking strip, morning, noon, and night, especially if you are an owner who lives in the front part of your building and actually lives there, it places a heavy burden, first of all, upon the east side of the street.
You need to wind
but
up,
it
please.
also cuts the street in half, destroying Brinkerhoff's open room space. And I think that's really important. Summing up, please support our HLC. I think that's important. And return us to the original parallel parking. I think the future of Brinkerhoff really deserves that. Thank you.
Kellum DeForest, and then Dana Longo.
Good afternoon, Kellum DeForest. The issue is that the Brinkerhoff district is a landmark district. It is the mission of the Pearl Chase Society to preserve Santa Barbara's historic and landmark sites of community interest. After many emails, the feeling of the board of the Pearl Chase Society is that the opinions of your Historic Landmarks Commission should be upheld. But many society members wish there be more discussion and study. Therefore, we suggest that the history and significance of this street and the whether the appropriateness of diagonal parking and the design of any new streetscape be examined further by the Historic Landmarks Commission. Could the City Council put the proposal for a permanent diagonal parking on hold for, let's say, 6 months? This could provide time for a solution acceptable to the residents, the public, and the Historic Landmarks Commission. Was not the intent of the Landmark District to preserve the historic ambience? Thank you.
Dana Longo, did you have a question?
I do.
Mr. DeForest?
Mr. DeForest?
Mr. DeForest,
I have a
Mr.
question,
Hotchkiss
if I
has
could.
a question for you.
What do you envision when you say something is going to be a win-win for everybody?
Oh, I think there are various solutions. The Traffic Commission or City Planning had all sorts of fancy streetscape to be added to the area, and I don't think that's appropriate at all. I think if there could be a way of enabling the street to be the street certainly could be one way with parallel parking on either side of the street. That could be a solution.
Please
Or,
don't comment.
Or
with that.
certainly there needs to be a way that the street could be vacated at appropriate times, historic times, so that the street could show its 19th century feel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dana Longo.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, honorable members of the City Council. I'm Dana Longo. I have a estate planning practice on Brinkerhoff Avenue. I've been there since 1998 myself. This boils down to about 3 reasons for me as to why I'm in support of this change. 1, you get 7 more parking spaces. 2, it calms the traffic. And 3, as you can see, the overwhelming majority of the residents of Brinkerhoff Avenue are in favor of it. Those of us who live and use the area most frequently are requesting that you make this change. I don't see much the historic significance of the parking configuration. It seems to me that what's special about Brinkerhoff Avenue is the Victorian architecture, and that came about well before the development of the automobile. So if you have one-way traffic or two-way traffic or parallel or angled, to me it just doesn't make any difference in terms of the historic nature of the Victorian architecture. One point in that regard, though, is that if you do make it one way, you preclude the traffic from turning left from Haley and flooring it up to Coda, so you make a more pleasant environment. Those who come down Brinkerhoff are there because they want to be, which makes it a nicer place. It's not people just using Brinkerhoff Avenue as a thoroughfare. I really appreciate your time in considering this, and hope you feel it appropriate to grant this request. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment to the council. Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is one of those difficult ones. I can't remember who I was talking to, but you don't very often get a situation where the entire Historic Landmark Commission votes one way, and all of the neighbors on Brinkerhoff Avenue, which is known as a hotbed of historic preservationism, have exactly the contrary opinion. And that makes it difficult for us, and I think it made it difficult for the HLC as well. In watching their brief deliberations, at least a couple of the commissioners mentioned that they themselves felt conflicted about this. And another commissioner mentioned that this really should be resolved at City Council. for which I thank her. A couple of things occur to me about this. One thing, there did seem to be complete agreement, both among the neighbors and the HLC members who spoke about it, that the change to one-way was a beneficial change. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Everyone seemed to agree on that topic. And all of the disagreement centers around the diagonal parking, which is, it's partly an aesthetic judgment. And there are people who like it, there are people who don't. The first time I walked onto Brinkerhoff, not knowing that the parking had been reconfigured, I was a little bit shocked myself. But I saw that when I was at the open house in December, when all the houses on the street were open for an event, I talked it over, and it seemed like everyone I spoke with, almost everyone I spoke with, liked the change. I'm sensitive to the idea that it has made it a safer street for many people. And part of the reason I asked about the period of significance is I think it is largely true that the significant houses on Brinkerhoff predate the automobile, at least the widespread acceptance of the automobile. So to some extent, anything we do in terms of street configuration is going to be foreign to the period in which the street is historically significant. And in my view, I remember when the Andalusia was constructed, to me that had an enormous impact on the street, an impact, at least in my view, far greater than a change in the parking. So things are going to change. And to those who say that that this kind of diagonal parking is not part of the historical context, I would say that Brinkerhoff really is a unique situation. It's a landmark district, but it's also a street like no other in Santa Barbara. And it does not have to be exactly like every other street, partly for that reason. So this is a tough one for me because I don't like going against the HLC, and I think what I would recommend is, my own feeling is that because the vast majority of the neighbors, and I greatly respect the Vasallos and the contributions that they've made to their neighborhood and respect their opposition to this because it is a big change. But the vast majority of the neighbors seem to believe that this is good for their neighborhood. That carries a lot of weight with me. And what I would ask is that this go back to the HLC, in my view, with the direction, this is what I would propose if there's majority support for it, that the council definitely supports the concept of keeping it a one-way street, and also supports the idea of diagonal parking, but is asking the HLC to help us find a way to make this palatable to everyone and to do it in such a way that it does as little damage as possible to the historic fabric of the district. So that's where I would come down on this. I obviously haven't heard from my colleagues. It's a tough one. These are the decisions that nobody really likes making because somebody is not going to get what they want, and everyone involved in this, from the HLC members to all the neighbors on Brinkerhoff, sincerely care about this street and sincerely care about our city. And I wish we could satisfy everyone's desires completely. We won't be able to do that. But that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. House?
I really appreciate everyone coming out today and sharing your ideas and your concerns. And I really appreciate HLC as well for really sticking to their guns and trying to get this right. And it's a tough one, especially when you have a neighborhood who is adapted to and really appreciates the changes that have been made. I it's not a difficult one for me, quite honestly. I think this is one of those where the aesthetic, the beauty of the improvements and the favor of the neighbors and the actual highlighting of the historic structures by this new arrangement of the parking truly is a celebration of what Brinkerhoff is all about, and not just in the physical beauty of it, which is to be commended, because that's due largely in part to the neighbors' care and stewardship of the street and the landscaping and all the rest, but also to the spirit of it. I mean, the fact that the light bulb went off for people after they had initial concerns and they began to recognize and realize that there was something kind of beautiful and wonderful happening here, that they were willing to get together, wake up to it, appreciate it, celebrate it, and now really come here and stand up for it. I think there's a great spirit here that we want to honor, and that's what we really believe in Brinkerhoff to be. It's a spirit of not just a time gone by, but a living, vital, breathing neighborhood that feels the history, but also is current. And I think it was interesting. I like that comment about the new construction that's on the Chapala side. There is an approach in historic preservation that recognizes that when there is a distinction between the new and the old, and especially when it's not an objectionable distinction, but there's clearly a distinction, it celebrates, it highlights the character of the old. And in fact, Brinkerhoff now is probably, I would say, more beautiful than it's ever been. I had my business right over there, just around the corner, as some of you remember, and I was there for a number of years. And I really fell in love with Brinkerhoff. And I don't think I've ever seen it as beautiful and vital and viable as this kind of curious mix of uses, people living there and having their businesses there and people just coming to enjoy it. So I commend you all for standing up for your street and for coming here and really sharing your love for it the way that you have. And I will be supporting you in keeping the diagonal parking one way, just the way it is. We should probably, if we do approve this today, to stay this way. We should give some good direction to HLC so it doesn't become sort of a revolving door. They did ask for, in their deliberations, they asked City Council from a policy perspective to give the guidance that they need to go, and then when the hardscape improvements are made, they can put their eye on that and not have to go back through this around a second time.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I, too, commend you for not just being here today, but for the work that all of you have done to make this such a beautiful place. And I also appreciate HLC's conundrum and their integrity for looking at history and making their best call on what should happen going forward. I, like Mr. House, am so impressed with the neighborhood getting together. I actually had a conversation with Mr. Longo about, I'd say, a month ago, and I said, one of the things that's really important is to get the neighborhood fully vetted. And here you all are. And you've just done a great job of putting the information out there and of stating your case eloquently. And I commend you for that. And then, as I said, behind that, the day in, day out, homegrown historic management that you folks have undertaken and do undertake every day. The mixed use quality, that we have both residences and businesses working together, living together. It's just great. So I can support the proposal as it's outlined, and I also I don't want I'm a real fan of Mr. Vassallo, who is a neighborhood activist, a city activist in many areas, and I totally respect your position here, Tony, and look forward to working with you on many other neighborhood issues, most of which we agree on fully. So. And I also don't want transportation staff to let this go to their head too much. That's a little concerned about that. But again, skepticism turned into support on this project, and it's a good thing. Thank you,
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Staff, why isn't EIR required? Or some sort of environmental...
Michael Berman, one of our environmental planners, will answer this.
Yeah, please.
Mayor Schneider, member of the council.
An EIR is not required, but since this is an historic district or a potential historic district, we're required under the California Environmental Quality Act to prepare documentation to indicate that this would meet Secretary of Interior standards and would therefore not have a significant impact on the environment to qualify for a categorical exemption under the California Environmental Quality Act.
Okay, is that a big deal, or can we do that pretty easily?
It's not a big deal. Ballpark $2,000 to $5,000. If we can get a consultant to not provide us with a lot of research and analysis of it being a historic district, and just accept that it is a historic district, and just prepare an analysis of the project's potential impacts on the district, and show how they would be, the changes would be consistent with Secretary of Interior standards, then the price would be on the low side compared to the higher side.
Okay, thank you. In our packet here, it talks about sounds like fortress-like terminus or something at each end of the street to make sure that nobody goes the wrong way. But since this isn't funded and there are other ways to do that, could we do it with planters or bollards or something that would be less expensive and visually attractive?
Mr. Allen?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, what you see in this slide here is what we currently have out there, a couple of planters that are actually made out of fiberglass.
Right.
If council does support the residents, we would put some trees in these planters, and we have them on both ends of Brinkerhoff. As you mentioned, this is not in the CIP. It is not funded. I have not been able to identify a funding source, and it would most likely be in this configuration for a number of years before we would put it in permanent. So only reason we would go back to HLC would be when Michael and Jessica finish the environmental analysis, we would have to have them go back and accept the historic structures report. But we would keep in this temporary configuration until we have identified funding and come up with a design solution that would be acceptable to the Historic Landmarks Commission. But the only reason we're looking at having either the planters or some type of curb is, like you mentioned, to prevent cars from going the wrong way on Brinkerhoff, as well as providing protection for the vehicles that are parked on either end of the street.
Okay, well, as long as we do that as cost effectively as possible in this economic climate, I think that's very important. Well, I must admit that I was impressed with Mrs. Murray because initially I've gone back and forth on this, but don't worry. But I didn't like the look of it. Then I was overwhelmed by your organization and barrage of emails and personal comments, and then Mrs. Murray, I thought, among other things, was incredibly sincere, and I hope that rang true with you. But I plan to support you all so long as you agree that you'll keep talking to the Vasallos and welcome them in your neighborhood as you have so far. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Nice lead in, Frank. I must say that I've rarely had a more enjoyable body of public comment. I'd like to hear from these folks on a lot of issues around the city, frankly. I thought that was very nice. I love the idea of neighborhood self-determination. I think when neighbors get together in a common cause, I really appreciate that. One comment came up about the potential, I think, of a resident parking situation or permit. I don't know if that's something that can be looked at by traffic and zoning at some point, or if that's desirable to the neighbors. Is that been on the table, Mr. Allen?
That area of the street is currently in a already established zone. We have not signed it. The biggest issue with their request is the weekend evening hours is more of a law enforcement issue. So if we were to go ahead and sign it, it would be on a complaint basis rather than regularly patrolling the area. But that's something that I could work with the residents in implementing if that's something that they desire. Basically, I would want the same support to implement that as we have for the configuration of the street.
My next comment is one I can't believe I'm about to make, but I'm a little concerned about the process, frankly. And that is, while I appreciate neighbors coming together, and you guys have basically done your own environmental review by living through this last year and a half or so, there are objects of process and how we make this work on a permanent basis, how it fits into the general plan. We have nothing in the CIP for it. What these planters or bollards would look like or how they'd be configured at one point in time, I have to say that it's compelling. I like the idea of the way the traffic circulates, but because I like it or because a group of folks like it, is that going to be in keeping with how we normally do things, and how do we proceed on that? So, like Mr. Francisco, I'd like to see this with a better finding from HLC, and I don't know if it's going to take HLC and TCC to get together in a joint meeting to rediscuss this, because partially, I don't really get how traffic and automobiles have that much historical, they have an impact, but not historical significance. However, you have a traffic engineering situation, and if HLC is the one that's going to be determining how this finally looks, I think there needs to be some other input on how that works out. Size, position of the planters, visibility, all those issues I think have to be engineered rather than just they were temporarily put there and they seem to have worked. But I think if we go for a long-range solution, I think it's going to take some more input. So that would be my suggestion, is perhaps either with HLC and traffic engineering, or HLC and TCC, some kind of collaborative effort to come up with a final solution. In the meantime, this seems to be functioning at least on a temporary basis.
We certainly can do that. Once we've identified a funded project, we would bring the TCC back involved, and we can, talk to the chair of the HLC, maybe have a joint meeting. In fact, I had lunch or coffee with the chair of the TCC and said, hey, it might be great to have a joint meeting with the HLC from time to time. And this might be a good topic, but we're probably a number of years away before we get to the point where we could do a permanent configuration. I would ask staff to work with the residents to, help us beautify the planter boxes. From a distance they look pretty good, but on a long-term basis, not so good. And even if they would be willing to put some type of color in there, some vines to kind of cover the exterior of it, but we can work with the residents, and hopefully they would adopt them and help us with the maintenance of them.
Well, as compelling as the neighbors have been in their testimony today, the point that the Fasalos brought up, which I have to agree with, was the fact that this, it's grassroots and it's great, but it's not how we normally do things. Maybe it'd be great if that's how we did things, but it's not how we normally do them. So, it is. So how are we going to configure the Upper East next, or the Mesa? Are we going to do it in the same way? And I think there needs to be some kind of a template that goes forward with this.
Yeah, we can.
No matter what the end result is.
We can explore that.
Thank you.
Just so I'm clear, assuming this moves forward, it's going to go, it has the environmental analysis, it has to go back to HLC at that point anyway, right?
It will have to go back to HLC. They're going to have to accept the historic structures report. And once we've cleared that hurdle and the HCC does accept it, then we'll be back before council for an amendment in the municipal code to make Brinkerhoff into a one-way street. So right now it's still considered to be a temporary one-way street, and then we would make it permanent after we've cleared the environmental process.
And then when there is a project proposal for the permanent structure, then that would go through HLC in the normal process.
That is correct.
That Mr. Rauch was talking about. Okay. Ms. Self.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Hotchkiss and I, when this was first fairly newly installed, went down, and I have to say personally I think it does make it more urban feeling than neighborhoods. But the biggest weight here for me is how much all of you have gotten together. Normally when somebody wants a street change that is more of a boulevard, I feel like it's not your private street, it's a public street. But, this is a short area. It's your home. I would want to have the home on the side where cars weren't parked, not the side where they were pointing in. But that's just me personally. And I am very much an advocate for neighbors speaking and navigating the system to what benefits them. And since you've been there a long time, I agree with Mr. Hotchkiss that the sketch that's shown makes it even more urban looking. So if we could give direction to HLC to kind of soften that look a little bit, make it somehow, however you do that, that's their job, to not have it look quite as
urban. Of course, it's just a sketch drawing. Who knows what they would come up with? But I think the planters or bollards or something like that would be more in keeping with the period of the homes. And so, therefore, I kind of like what Mr. Francisco has said, and that letting this rumble around in HLC for a while, because many times through this back and forth, the clay becomes better formed than just what initially we want. And so I don't know that we need to review it again, but just that HLC get that direction from us. And then if anybody hates it, you can appeal it, right? So, but I think based on the neighborhood's commitment to this project, I would support it.
Well, I think, thank you for all for being here this time. There was a few weeks ago when you didn't know when it was coming on the agenda, and we heard it, and we have pictures and emails. I mean, really, it's democracy at its best in a lot of ways. And with, open public hearings and the petition, I do want to acknowledge the concerns from HLC, and I think when this comes back to them on a more, looking at the permanent structure of it and getting the historic, the environmental analysis, there is an opportunity there for additional feedback and details from HLC members. But I'm very excited about this, that this came from the residents, many of whom started the Brinkerhoff Historic District from the beginning. So it's not like you were just newly there and wanted to change it, that you created what is there. And I have a feeling, Mr. Allen, that the neighbors will very well take care of the temporary boxes there and make it as beautiful as every other part of the street. So I'm fully in support of this, and the thought of it also creating a safer feel and actual safer traffic flow and circulation around the street. 7 additional parking spaces. That's expensive real estate there that we're about to expand and give people more access. I mean, that's, I think, a very exciting thing. So the one, I guess, request I would have as this moves forward is to keep it simple. The last thing we want is everyone's happy with the way it is, and all of a sudden, okay, bells and whistles on here, do all these other things that now, careful what you wish for kind of thing. So just keep it simple in terms of, moving this to a permanent one-way street and whatever is needed for the safety aspect of both sides to protect the cars and the people there. So, congratulations. I think you've convinced emails work, Mr. House.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'm going to make a motion right now, and I want staff to include in this comment some way of articulating. I haven't found the right words for this, but some way to articulate that when it does come to HLC for review, when there's a funded project, that it's the expression of the council that we would like to see a softening of the hardscape so that it reflects a less urban feel. So I think that's the best I can do for the language. I move that we maintain the one-way street and angled parking in its current configuration.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous vote. Congratulations. Okay. Item number 8.
Professional Services Agreement for Zone 1 hauler franchise renewal.
Just wait a moment or two as people leave the chambers. We still have a long council agenda in front of us, so if you'd like to speak, if you could do so outside the chambers so we can keep working. Yeah, good luck trying to convince Brinkerhoff residents.
Turned into a block party.
Could you please take your conversations outside the chambers? Thank you. Okay. Okay, we still have a council meeting in session, so if you could please move your conversations outside, I'd appreciate it so we can continue our work. Don't mess with Brinkerhoff. Okay. Ms. Schmidt, why don't you get started, and I think once that should move things along.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council members. I'm Christy Schmidt from the City Administrator's Office, and we are bringing the issue of the Zone 1 hauler franchise renewal contract for professional services back for your consideration today. Just as a reminder to go through how we got to this point, we are in the process of discussing and starting the process for a Zone 1 procurement for solid waste collection services for the residential and business sectors in the city's franchise Zone 1. Zone 1 is one of two zones that we have in the city for collection services, and the current agreement with Allied Waste Services expires in June 2013, and so we are starting the process to find a hauler for that replacement contract. The city's solid waste collection contracts are the largest private contracts that the city has with a single vendor. Collectively, it's over $15.5 million per year that the city is paying for these services. Typically, these are long-term agreements, 10 years or more. So for this half of the city, Zone 1, we can expect the value of the contract that we're going to be entering into to exceed $80 million over the 10-year term, if the term is 10 years. All residents and businesses pay for solid waste services, which I think we have one exception that self-hauls in the city. So as opposed to some other jurisdictions, we have all of our residents and businesses having collection services. And the city has an obligation to ratepayers when we're looking at these contracts to get the best services possible for the best price possible. Staff is recommending, as you know, professional support for the procurement process. And that is primarily the importance of getting these very, very expensive long-term hauling contracts right for the ratepayers. And professional services help us both because they bring in expertise that staff doesn't necessarily have, and also because helps us to supplement our staff time, which, as you know, is used for other division priorities. Having professional services standard practice among cities for solid waste franchise procedures. It's very typical for the city of Santa Barbara to contract for solid waste support services when we're looking at a contract amendment or a new contract. The other thing that professional support can bring is third-party objectivity to ensure a fair process. As you know, this process, we've got two strong current haulers. We have other haulers in the area, and we want to make sure that we are confident that the process is fair and objective, and that those proposers are also confident that the process is fair and objective. We are looking at 4 areas of support. Professional support. The first would be in our needs assessment, determining what services we want to have, what structure we want to have to our rates, and how we might want to structure our solid waste services for the next 10 years. Also for the RFP process, and this is in, once we've determined what our needs are, designing an RFP that is understandable to the haulers so that they can give us the proposals that we need in order to do an effective evaluation. Also for the selection process, having a professional with significant solid waste expertise to help us evaluate the proposals that we've gotten from the proposers and to help us make a selection. And the negotiation process, once we've selected a hauler, really nailing down the terms of this long-term agreement. So all 4 areas of support we are recommending professional support for. When we looked at professional services providers in this area, we settled on HF&H, and we really felt that HF&H brought us the whole package that we would need for this process. They have significant experience in franchise procurement and negotiations. They have a very high client satisfaction rate. They have an expertise in the full spectrum of solid waste collection and disposal issues. They're not just focused in one area. They really have a broad expertise as well. They have awareness of industry trends, technological advances, and performance standards. They have significant staff resources, and this was a one for us in that they aren't just a single person in an office providing support. They do have a breadth of staff support and resources that we could draw on. And perhaps most importantly, we were really impressed by their professionalism and their ability to communicate with staff and to really listen to what our needs were and also to reflect those back and to give us ideas. So we were really impressed with their communication. They also bring a certain level of objectivity in local issues to the process. And so we actually do have Laith Izzet from HF&H here today, and Laith is going to be available to answer questions later if you're interested. So the history of council action on this issue is on November 23rd, when we first made this recommendation, excuse me, that should be 2010, I apologize, council approved an interim contract of $10,000 with HF&H to get started on the process, which we have been actively working with HF&H. And referred the remainder of the contract for consideration of the Sustainability Committee. We met with the Sustainability Committee, and Laith Izzet was there, and they unanimously supported a contract in a new amount of $110,200. This is reduced from the original price by eliminating some extra services. We also had HF&H gave us a break a little bit on some of those services, and by the $10,000 initial contract that was approved. We came back in March 22nd, 2011, and at that point, council asked staff to return following the conclusion of the county and the Goleta processes. Both the county and the city of Goleta are in the process of renewing collection franchise contracts in certain of their zones. And so you asked us to come back once those processes were complete and to talk about this contract again. So the county's process, and Mark Schleich is here, and I'm sure Mark can certainly address kind of that process if you have questions more effectively and completely than I can. But just to give it an overview of the county's process, they did put out an RFP for 8-year contracts for 3 of the 5 county zones, valued collectively at $7.4 million per year. Only the current county haulers were invited to propose, and that is Allied Waste Services, Marburg Industries, and Waste Management. The successful hauler for Zone 2, which is the area north of Goleta and Santa Barbara, unincorporated area, went to Marburg Industries, and this was a change from the current hauler, Allied Waste. And in your staff report, there is a summary of the evaluation of the proposals and how they ended up there. And for Zone 4 and Zone 5, that's in the San Ynez Valley and the Lompoc area, and then also in the area surrounding Santa Maria, the contract went to Waste Management Incorporated, their current hauler in those areas. So the results of the process, the county did get some good service enhancements, and I won't go through them all, but some of them were battery collection. Residents are going to be able to place batteries on top in plastic bags on top of their recycling containers for pickup, so they won't need to drive down to an ABOP to get rid of those batteries. More green waste and recycling for residents. Sharps, the medical sharps primarily, residents will be able to, they'll get self-addressed envelopes and be able to send those for proper disposal. There'll be additional bulky waste pickups and pickups of illegal dumping in the rights-of-way, which is a significant benefit to a public agency to be able to rely on a hauler to respond when there's dumping in the rights-of-way. And so they did get some good service enhancements. They also got some rate reductions. One significant change is that they will be going to standard automated service in the residential sector out there, which is where carts and cans are picked up by the truck and brought to the curbside versus backyard service. People will still be able to get backyard service, but it will be for a premium above. And by doing that and through negotiation, they were able to reduce residential rates by at least 10%, depending on the zones. And in the zone 4 and 5, they were able to reduce commercial rates by 15% in those areas. And zone 2, there isn't a whole lot of commercial activity. They didn't have any reduction in rates there, but it's really because there isn't a whole lot of commercial activity there, and a lot of what is commercial out there is county services. So the county did use 2 consultants for this process. One sat on the RFP team and was there to help draft documents. They also used another consultant for the evaluation of their proposals. Significantly, and we met with Leslie Wells, who was the manager out there who was in charge of this process, and she told us that they had 2 high-level staff that were significantly devoted to this process, virtually full-time. The manager spent, she estimates, about 70% of her time, and she had a high-level staff member spending almost 100% of his time on it as well for a year and a half. The fees they were paid $80,000 in consultants' fees, and according to Ms. Wells, the consultant services were key to this process, and she gave us the example that R.W. Beck, in conjunction with staff, discovered some errors in the proposal that she felt were significant. In the city of Goleta had an 8-year contract for the area north of Hollister Avenue that is currently serviced by Allied Waste. They elected to go into sole source negotiations with Marburg Industries. Marburg has 2 options to extend their agreement in the other area, basically their other zone, which is the south of Hollister area, until 2019. And by doing sole source negotiation with Marburg and combining the services for those 2 areas, it allowed them to negotiate citywide benefits and rate improvements that they would not have been able to do had they gone independently with that zone, with another hauler. So citywide, they saw some of the same service enhancements and some additional enhancements as the county, some a little different. For the city of Goleta, let's see here. Average of 20% in the residential sector, 22% in the multifamily sector, and 5% in the commercial sector as reduction in rates. So they saw some significant rate reductions out of that process. With rates being reduced, the revenue that the city would be taking in through its franchise fees, because it's percent-based, it was 2%, would also be reduced. So they did negotiate an increase, which is paid by the hauler, to the franchise fee to 5% to help offset the loss in revenue to the city resulting from the rate reductions. The city of Goleta also used a consultant for negotiations, and paid approximately $60,000 in consultant fees. City of Goleta staff, we also met with City of Goleta staff and talked to them about their process, and they also were very, very happy with and supportive of the consultant services that they did. And it was interesting, each of these cities had different sort of needs that they were looking to have met with their consultant services. With the City of Goleta, they were very much focused on rates and cost accounting, and so they went with a consultant that had a lot of expertise in that area. The county went with a consultant who was a lawyer who really focused a lot on helping them draft their contract documents. So. But the City of Goleta also was very happy with the consultant services, and particularly on the financial aspects of the solid waste business. Did you want to add anything to that, Matt? You also were involved in those discussions with the county and the City of Goleta. Okay, great. So again, we've talked about the need for staff support. We have reviewed the scope of work that HF&H submitted, and we do feel there are areas that staff could move in to try and absorb some of that workload. But those are really limited. We really do feel like we need the kind of support that is in the proposal from HF&H. We really are looking to HF&H for their expertise. I mean, we, as city staff, we manage solid waste contracts. The staff does a lot of diversion work, but they don't run a solid waste business. They aren't involved in the financials of what is economical when you're talking about providing services and not economical. And having HF&H to do that is going to be really important. We also do have some significant workload issues. It wouldn't be practicable for us to devote 2 high-level staff members to this process. We are looking at devoting 20% of my time from the city administrator's office. About approximately 50% of Matt's time is the environmental services manager. He's also got a division to run in addition to that, and about 5% of Bob Samario's time into this process. And even that doesn't come up to a full-time person. So we really couldn't be putting the type of staff, we don't have the resources to put that type of staff work into this that the county necessarily does. And we have historically used professional procurement support for this type of contract. In 2001, the city contracted with IRI, which is a firm that was around at the time, and Hanson Bridget to help with this process. And at that time, Zone 1 was worth significantly less, at about $6.1 million. As we go through developing the process, we do have some significant issues and some unique issues that are unique to us as a city. For one, the city of Santa Barbara has mandatory service, which is not something that Goleta and the county have. So we have different needs there. We have different space constraints, particularly in the dense areas of downtown for containers that aren't faced by certain other jurisdictions. And we do our own billing and collection. The other agencies don't do their own billing and collection. And as a result of the mandatory service and the billing and collection, we have Prop 218 issues. As you know, we do a lot of Prop 218 noticing and are very cognizant of those requirements, whereas the county and Goleta are, because they don't have mandatory service and are not involved in the billing, are not as involved with that. We do see some rate opportunities that we'd like to address through this process, and in designing the RFP the right way, we really feel that we can get the information we need to achieve some of the priorities the changes we'd like to see in kind of the rate structure. One is to go to billing for container. If you look at your solid waste bill right now, it just says cart and can service, and you can't really see what you're paying for. By going to a system that's a little bit more like the water billing, where you get a service fee and then you can actually see by your usage what you're being charged for. We want to give the customer, both make it more understandable for them and give them the tools to be able to manage their own costs by monitoring their bill. We'd also like to use the process to help with some business rate validation to ensure that we're collecting what we need to be collecting from the business sector. We'd also like to potentially use this process to achieve an equity rebalancing between the commercial and residential sector. We think there may be an imbalance there, and we'd like to use this process designed appropriately in order to address that. So that's another reason that we really are looking to have some good expertise behind this process.
Madam Mayor, question, please.
Go ahead, Mr.
Ms. Schmidt, when you say rate opportunities, as we looked at the county in Goleta, where rates went down, does that mean rate opportunity means an ability to change how we bill, or does it mean a reduction?
I think it's both. I mean, I think we would hopefully be looking to achieve rate reductions as well. But in addition to that, just restructuring kind of how those rates are billed so that we can achieve some other goals through that.
But we're trying to do rate reduction as they did in the county, then, if we can. Thank you.
I would hope so, yes. So our recommendation is to approve reduced contract in a not to exceed amount of $110,200, and this was reduced from the initial bid amount by the $10,000 already authorized. HF&H again reduced their services by $5,800 as a concession for the city, and we reduced the $23,000 in extra services that would not be part of this authorization. And we think that we can absorb the cost of this process without those extra services if we do have extra proposers, or if we do decide to negotiate with more than one hauler. We think that by assuming more work, we can balance those costs in the existing in this authorization amount. This really is, again, a very small percentage, 0.14% of the value of a 10-year solid waste franchise, the $80 million value of a 10-year solid waste franchise. We think in the context of this and the potential benefits to the ratepayers and customers, it is a small price to pay, and with potentially great trade-offs if we get this process right.
Mr. House has a question.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want, on the top of your slide there, the not to exceed 110,200. I'll ask you this. Is there a contingency in there, though, for each additional respondent to the RFP that they would get more money for each one, few $1,000s for each additional one?
In the initial proposal, it did include a contingency for receiving more than 4 proposals. Mm-hmm. This does not include that. The idea being that if we were to receive more than 4 proposals, we would work to absorb work within this contract so that we didn't need to have extra services for those in order to evaluate those additional proposals.
You used the words a minute ago, absorb the costs. Do you mean that you would take funds from other parts of your budget, of the department's budget, and then pay them for those that would be separate from this authorization? Or
no, I mean that we would absorb some of the work within the. Our intent is to try and absorb some of the work within the $110,000 in order to reduce that amount, and so that by staff absorbing more of the work that HF&H would do, that we would be able to offset that by staff assuming more work.
So there's no limit, because this is a nationwide search, right? This is not like just with a limited group of potential respondents, right? This could be anywhere in the United States. There could be 20 that respond, right? And then there's no contingency to pay them more for that?
I think that would depend on how we set up the qualifications for proposals. Okay. Do you want to address this anymore there?
What gave me rise to ask that question is just, I know in the amount that Goleta spent, they had originally authorized like $30,000 or something, ended up spending $60,000. That was a smaller system, but is it possible that this could half again or double because we have a lot of respondents?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House.
Just to follow up, in our staff report dated March 3rd, 2011, number 9 under the fee estimate, the $5,500 still there, and so is a $7,500 additional cost if there's negotiations with more than one proposer. So if you could address both of those as you answer, that would be great.
So, Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, realistically, I don't believe we're going to be getting many more than 4 or 5 proposers. we'll structure the RFP so that the criteria are pretty clear, so that they're going to have to really be able to demonstrate that they can perform the scope of work that we're requesting. So it's unlikely we're going to be getting 20, for example. We could get 6, maybe 7, but my expectation is we'll get somewhere between 4 and 6. And I guess the question you had asked, could you ask that again, please?
It's just to follow up on Mr. House's question. In our staff report under fee estimate as part of the contract, it's dated today, page 9, list the $5,500 additional services for more than 4 proposals. It also lists, it says if negotiations are conducted with more than one proposal, the additional cost shall be $7,500 per company.
And that is in addition to assuming, I mean, again, this is a not to exceed, so that is assuming that we use this full 110,000 level of services, which is what we would intend to try not to do. So the idea is that we wouldn't, for these base level of services, the 110, that we wouldn't use the whole 110 and hopefully be able to absorb the cost of additional.
That's not what this fee estimate says. The fee estimate says the estimated total cost to perform the workplace task is $110,200, excluding the optional transition assistance in task 5. And then it goes on to what these additional. So that's not what you're saying. I appreciate that you want to stay within the 110, but the contract in front of me says something different.
And that's the concern that I was just voicing, because it seems like it's open-ended. We're saying not to exceed, but the way the contract appears to be written, I mean, is what we're seeing today, is that it could be, half again as much, depending on, given it's a nationwide search that's not limited, we could have quite a few respondents wanting to do business in Santa Barbara. It's a pretty large contract, so. Well, that's my concern.
The only authority we're asking you for is $110,000 and not to exceed. We're not asking for any additional money. So if we would have to come back to you and amend the contract in order to spend more money.
Okay. Why don't they finish their presentation and then we can continue with. All right, but one quick question for Mr. Hotchkiss. Yep.
Mr. Samario, are we obligated to respond or evaluate if we get 10? Can we right off the bat say the first 5 are not in the ballpark?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, that's correct. We can, if they don't meet the criteria, then they're not going to be considered beyond just receiving the proposal and determining that they've either met the minimum criteria or they have not. So, yeah, it's possible we can get 10, but we could immediately just put aside 5 because they didn't meet the minimum standards that we were looking for. So,
all right, but if they, I guess that's where it gets debatable. What if they meet the minimum standards?
Again, it's possible that we can get more than 5, we can get 10. I just don't think we are going to get that many. If we craft the criteria properly at the front end with an RFP process, we're likely going to get somewhere around 5. But again, theoretically, we can get more, but again, my guess is going to be unlikely. And maybe Mr. Seth has more information about that. He could speak to that because he's more familiar with that sort of process.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm a trash expert. This is all that I do. And it's all I've been doing for more than 20 years. I've negotiated more than $1 billion in solid waste contracts.
Can you move the mic up a little bit? So make sure. Thank you.
I've managed 22 or so competitive processes in recent years. We've never, and they're all been open to anybody in the country. And I've never had more than 9 ever. So there's no chance of 20, 30 proposals. It simply will not happen. There aren't that many qualified service providers with any reasonable access to facilities that could propose. We typically get 4 or 5. One time we got 2, and the all-time record was 9 in the city of West Hollywood. West Hollywood is adjacent to the city of Los Angeles, which has more than 100 solid waste companies operating in that city, and they could only get 9 proposals. I think your challenge here is going to be getting enough proposals to have competitive procurement. I've seen cities go through this process and only get 1 proposal because it wasn't done right. Sometimes people just assume, well, we're an important city, the bidders will come. That's not necessarily the case. It's got to be done right, and I see the bigger challenge here ensuring that we get a handful of really good quality proposals so that you can have a vigorous competition.
Well, since you're standing right there, and I know you're just about done with your presentation, but we're on this topic, if you're convinced that you're not going to get many proposals, why not just strike out the language from this part of the contract if it's a non-issue?
Well, I put in the number that I think you're going to get. You may get one more, you might get two more. You're not going to get 10, 11, 12 proposals. It's just not going to happen. I'll tell you this. I'll be happy to say that if there are more than 9 proposals and you want them evaluated, I will do them for free, because it's not going to happen. But I will.
Well, that was my point of asking.
I will be happy to do that, because that's the most I've ever seen come through. I think the reality is, I would be happy to get 4 or 5 here.
Okay. Thank you. Why don't we finish your presentation? Thank you very. We'll probably have more questions for you in a bit, but why don't you finish your presentation, then we'll bring it back to council.
Okay. So the idea would be that this would be fully reimbursed to the solid waste fund by the successful hauler, which is fairly standard in the industry. Goleta, for example, Marburg Industries paid a $75,000 procurement reimbursement to the city for their process. So that would not be unusual in the industry, and Laith could talk to that further. So that would be our recommendation, and we did come up with kind of an alternative. If you were uncomfortable moving forward at this point with the full contract, we would recommend a reduced area of support where we just focused on the needs assessment and the RFP design. We really feel like these are, particularly where the place where we need the most expertise and the most experience in doing this process, would be in assessing our needs and designing an RFP that will get us the bids that we're looking for to address those needs. And in that case, it would be of the 4 areas of service in the agreement, it would be area 1 and 2 at a reduced contract not to exceed $55,100. And that would not include the evaluation proposals once it came in. There wouldn't be any extra services for that. We would need to, once we got those proposals, evaluate what our needs for support would be at that time. Still, I mean, we still think the evaluations of proposal is also a really important part of the process, and a place where someone who really knows their stuff in the solid waste business can be invaluable. So we would still need to evaluate what our needs would be at that time, but it would allow us to move forward at least with this first part of the process, if you're more comfortable with that. But again, we do think that the full support for the process is something that is advisable. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We have no speaker slips? Okay. Can I just start with a question, and then I'll open up? Can you put up the special issues slide again, just so I'm clear of what it is that you were saying? Okay, mandatory service basically means every single resident in the city must have trash service. There's no opt-out. Is that correct? Is that what you mean? And that's what happens in the city of Santa Barbara?
Madam Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. Space constraints, that's meaning like the Riviera and different circulation issues and how trucks can pick up trash. Is that what you mean by, and maybe commercial areas in the back? Is that what you mean by that?
That's part of it. It also means, like, for example, this city has a very high proportion of multi-unit residential, very small lots. We have actual physical constraints on the property, including equipment to get up narrow roads and canyons and things like that. So it encompasses pathways as well as the physical constraints of the property.
And then I understood the billing collection. I guess okay, so now that I get that, my first question is, what does picking a hauler, how does that relate? The space constraints I get, because they have equipment, how much they charge for them, how they actually pick up the trash. But by virtue of having mandatory service and because we do the billing collection, why is that a unique thing the city does that the county or no one else does, and why then does that make us have to do something different? Or
I don't think it necessarily is something different. This is more on the why can't we just take what the county's done and just apply it to the city? And I think the point of that was to show we are different than the county. We are different than Goleta, and so we can't just take what they've done and just superimpose it over our service in our area. And that was more the point, not that they don't have space constraint issues or different issues of their own.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. We do actually have one public comment, so why don't we do that? Kellum DeForest, and then we'll bring it back to council.
DeForest, good afternoon again. I would like to ask why this $110,000 is a lot of money. And I would like to ask why is the consultant fee, was the consultant fee for the whole county only $80,000, and here this fee is going to be $110,000, and I don't think there's that much difference in the collection of garbage between in Santa Barbara than there is in all the different areas, and many of them are residential, like Nolita and Mission Canyon and Montecito, that have as many problems as Santa Barbara has in the city. So I think, and I can't see why, since the county and Goleta has just done their study, why can't there be some piggybacking on what they learned? Why do we have to go back to square one? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that closes public comment. It's back to the council. Mr. House.
Just a question here on we have we don't have a uniform rate or service across the city on both sides of the city right now, do we? There's like two different rate structures and two different.
Actually, no, we do have uniform rates across the city right now, and that's because at the time that we negotiated these rates with the haulers, we were negotiating at the same time. And
I see. So we do have uniform rates on both sides of the city, same services, exactly both sides.
Yes.
And so is that a primary goal for us to continue in going even into this RFP, to continue that?
I think that that's going to be one of the policy decisions that we're going to work with the council and the sustainability committee. Not necessarily, one way to go would be if we can get a bid for lower services on the Zone 1 area of the city, to actually have those services be at a lower rate. So not necessarily it would be something that we would want to talk to the sustainability committee about, but that's one of the things in designing the RFP process that we'll want to work out.
Is it even possible for us to set it out that we would like to have lower rates citywide, or and better services citywide? In other words, out of this RFP process, that what comes out of it, one of the ideal conditions might be that we would have not only uniform service and rates, but that we would actually have achieved as Goleta a reduction.
The issue being there is that Marburg does have an existing agreement at their existing service levels and compensation rate, and they have two options to continue that for 5 years apiece. So that would be, and maybe I should have Mr. Wiley address this, but Marburg would need to agree to that in order for us to achieve those rate reductions. We'd have to find a way for Marburg to agree to do that.
Or they might volunteer that or something or whatever, but that would be, there's nothing that prohibits that. It's just could be one of the things that happens.
Yes.
All right, very good. And then, okay, I think you answered that question before. And then the mandatory service means that everybody does have. I was reading that differently. The mandatory services is not. It means that everybody participates. Is the main thing. Okay. The last question I have on this round is: what about the differential in cost between, like right now, we have two haulers that are in the city of Santa Barbara, and you saw the county went out and there were 3 that participated. Well, let's just say if it turns out that we do a national search and we end up with 4. So we've paid, a lot of money to a consultant to draft a request for proposals that is actually the delta there is just one additional participant in the mix. How do you? It seems like an awful lot of money to pay when we already have 2 that are competing back and forth and really would like to have this contract, and there's definitely some hot competition for this. What's the value added when the chances are likely that we will have very few people, few companies participating?
Do you want to take this? Do you want me to?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that regardless of which hauler your council ultimately awards the contract to, there are substantial changes to the language of the existing contracts that staff would like to pursue with your guidance. It's the contract as a hauling instrument we would like to bring up to the modern day, and it will set the stage for collection for the next 10 years in the city. So regardless of the hauler, there are improvements to the rate structure, to the service package, to working out many of the problems that we've already identified as the administrators of the existing contract that we would like to achieve. And essentially the RFP, there's a very, I wouldn't say a small step, but there is a lesser step between the RFP and the actual contract that's signed. The RFP contains the guts of what will be the contract. That's the real value of having the professional expertise, is we are going to be able to work out a lot of the issues that we already have now or we foresee over the next 10 years, draft an RFP that reflects that and will be easily translatable from the RFP document to the contract to whomever your council awards that document or that contract to.
So to build on what Matt's saying, even if it were two proposers, the value of this contract is in helping us to, of this professional service contract is helping us to design what we want for the next 10 years, and then putting it out there in a way that the proposers can understand it and bid in an equal environment, an objective and an equal way on providing the services that we've outlined that we want in the method that we want them. So even if it were just two proposers, the value of the contract would be realized.
I understand. Okay.
One other thing, I think it's really important to not underestimate the value of the free market system. And I think competition is good in encouraging our existing haulers to sharpen their pencils, especially when you're talking about a contract that is, multi-million-dollar contract. Creating that competitive environment is, I think, will benefit the ratepayers tremendously. And plus, I think the city attorney has opined that we need to open it up to other haulers, not just limited to the two that we have.
And do we know the rationale that the county used when they were going for three, using the three that were existing as opposed to opening up? What did you talk to them? And that was one of the things we were hoping you would do, is to learn what was in there. So
why don't you come on up, Mr.
Yeah, actually, Mark Schleich is here from the county, and he's the best person to address that.
Great, thank you, and I'm glad you're here today.
Thank you very much for being here today.
Madam Mayor, council members.
Name and title for the record for our clerk here.
Mark Schleich, County of Santa Barbara. The provisions of selecting a hauler are much different than any other provisions. Public Resource Code and year laws, local laws come into effect. Half of communities actually do their own hauling service. City of Lompoc, City of Santa Maria has their own staff doing it. The analogy that we used was kind of like a recruitment process. We use it often. We did reviews of the existing haulers through customer satisfaction surveys, through audits, through all of these things, and we determined, based on that, and the help of a subcommittee of elected officials, that we had three highly qualified high performers that we were within our grasps. And based on that decision, we limited it to those three. But we went through the exercise, and we looked at, should the county provide the service as our own staff? Should we open it completely to a franchise agreement? Should we just let it be free market? We landed on, through the process of continuing franchise agreements, and based on the past performance of the existing haulers, we limited it to those three.
When you say we, who was involved in that?
Well, we would be me and my staff, but we also had our consultant at the time, that's Constance Horning, and we had our county council involved, and we had members from our county executive office as well as our auditor controller's office. Staff would prepare the information and then return to subcommittee of elected officials, which was Salud Carbajal and Doreen Farr.
So you had supervisor involvement at
Two
this?
supervisors as far as the process in defining it. One of the other things we had, we hadn't necessarily bid these contracts out for quite a while. We had some change in ownership. So the original size of one of the areas was actually quite small in the Lompoc Valley. And we said, you know what, to encourage competition, we need to increase the size of that one, of that particular area, and we decrease the size of the other to make them both about $5 million contracts. So, you know, there's a lot of things that came into it. We solicited hauler advice from the very beginning, their ideas. We actually incorporated a lot of theirs. The two biggest ones was going to automation in the Goleta Valley. We already had it in the Santa Maria, North County. And then also the Sharps mailback was actually a suggestion from the haulers. So we tried to take our local knowledge, we tried to take their local knowledge, we tried to take their industrial knowledge, and then we used consultants to expand their personal knowledge in things that they had as well.
Well, Madam Mayor, and for Christie, and thank you very much. This idea of a subcommittee of the electeds, I think there's some value that you would want to have. I don't see that in the proposal anywhere, that there's some sort of a participation by the council along the way in this process. It would seem like that would be an important piece for some of the values and some of the interests that our constituents might raise, and we could have a little bit of input in that process along the way. That might be something we would want to add when we get there.
Actually, in the scope of services, it does talk several times about coming back to the Sustainability Committee and to the full council potentially at different points in the decision-making process. And that would be our intent.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, I was looking at that and noticed in task 1 about developing the needs and contracting strategy, we're involved. Task 2, preparing the issue, the request for proposal. So that's like what was just mentioned in terms of what goes in the RFP. But I didn't see anywhere in terms of any part of review or evaluating any of the proposals, even on an initial level. I wouldn't expect the council to partake in the final recommendation to come back to the full council, but just at first blush, and I don't know if that's unusual, or Mr. Slyke, if that was part of the subcommittee's work at the county, but just when the proposals first come back, of get a first blush at them and having some feedback in case there are questions. I don't see any sustainability committee, unless I missed it, in that section, which seems to be a key part of the process.
Generally, when the proposals come back, there is an established evaluation committee that is responsible for going through all of the proposals and issuing a recommendation. And I'm not sure whether it's whether elected officials being involved in that process is standard.
I don't know. That was just something I noticed that was missing. I don't know if
I think Mr. Slyke is left.
Oh, no, there he is. As part of the putting the RFP together, that I assume would also include what the evaluation process would look like. So,
well, one of the things is before we issue the RFP, and this would be pretty standard, we would work with the council to establish ahead of time how we were going to evaluate the proposals, and so the criteria for evaluation that the subcommittee would be using would be established with the subcommittee's prior approval, and even by the whole council as we release the RFP, would be approving the criteria by which the subcommittee would be evaluating those proposals.
Okay. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate staff having done what we asked them to do last time, was go and talk to county staff and bring back, I think, a pretty comprehensive report. And I've personally spoken to county staff myself somewhat about some of the differences, and it appears to me that the county and the city of Goleta kind of hit a home run in terms of their goals and what they achieved vis-a-vis their consultant work and the work with the haulers. And what I really appreciate about Mr. Slyke's comments about working with the haulers themselves to determine some of these criteria, to bring in their expertise after all they have been doing it for all these years. I believe we asked this last time. Did you take proposals from various consultants, or is HF&H the only consultant we spoke with regarding this work?
We looked at several different proposals. We did interview two of the people we decided that we wanted to interview, and we settled on HF&H. We were really and again, really it comes down to And this was obvious in talking to staff at Goleta and at the county. What are you looking for? What level of support? What are you focused on in determining? And we really felt that we got the package of the full level of support that we were looking for from HF&H. But yes, we did interview one other consultant, and we did look at several others.
Well, I do appreciate our staff's need for supplementation in terms of the commitment and the time you guys have to put into this. And I do believe consultant work on some levels is appropriate. I think everybody up here would agree that what we don't want to do is have more duplication of effort than necessary, seeing as how fresh these proceedings just were out in Goleta. And once again, looking at the results and the comprehensive report we were given on the results out there, I believe they did get the best price and the best service as a result. So seems like it's a pretty good template. Looking at I'm struggling with the differences and the uniqueness of the city versus the other unincorporated areas. I know that certainly we have the diversion program, the food scrap recycling program, which they don't have, and I also know that we are struggling with our balancing of these services right now financially. So in terms of using a consultant, I definitely wholeheartedly agree with that. What I would like to see before we went forward with a consultant, however, was some kind of input on the scoping of what we were doing. And what I asked for last time, which I realized wasn't appropriate at the time, but I think is appropriate now, I would like to question from a sustainability standpoint what we're doing differently than the county. And I'm speaking specifically of the food scrap program. We've got a situation that I personally participate in as a commercial user, and it isn't as onerous as I thought it would be, not a big deal, but I'm wondering what our real result is, what our net sustainability is, what kind of result we're having in the landfill, what kind of result we're having in our cost sustainability. We're making more trips to do the same thing. I don't know if we're getting the bang for our buck out of it. Like I said, I've spoken with other folks anecdotally about it. I'm not so sure that we are. Certainly the containers we get have to be replaced about every month because whoever the contractor was that made up those little yellow containers was probably the same guy that made the brick sidewalks on the beach, I think. They're just not working out too well. Anyway, they have to replace those all the time. But in terms of staff time, the number of trips, it's not sustainable financially. I don't think it's sustainable environmentally since we're making that extra trip. So I would like to see, before we went forward with this contract, an ability to rescope the exercise to at least tell us if what we're doing different than the county is working. As I look at the counties and the city of Goleta's models here, and the services they got and the rate reductions they got, those look like admirable targets to me. And I think we should look for commonalities, because trash and Tahigas is a regional issue, doesn't have municipalities or borders involved with it, even though the contracts do, and zones are. But I see this as a greater regional issue, and my concern is that if we're trying to be so unique and so different, are we doing it for the right reasons? And is it sustainable economically and environmentally in the long haul? And that's what I would like to know, if that's possible to fit into this process or not. Mr. Samario looks like he'd like to respond to that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, that's a long conversation we can have about the food scraps program. I think it is a sustainable program. I think particularly in the commercial sector, because we have restaurants that have a high amount of food waste, organic waste. You have to remember that burying trash is an expensive way to handle our waste. It's the most expensive thing we can do with it. And any ton we get out of that landfill somewhere else is a win-win. And that's just a fact, financially, environmentally, in all respects. So I think it is a sustainable program. The trips that are extra trips we're having are minimized or offset by the fact that we're not having those organics converted into methane gas to the landfill. We're not driving that material over up to the Gaviota Coast area where it's going to be buried in the landfill. It's going instead to the transfer station. It is being shipped over, of course, to Santa Maria for composting. But we could talk long and hard about this. We've done the analysis. The environmental impacts of taking our material into and sending it up to Santa Maria and converting it to compost is a win, and it's more environmentally beneficial than burying it in our landfill. And again, we can talk long and hard about that, but certainly within this process, we will look at that to see, in fact, if we can validate that it is a sustainable program and look at the finances of that. I just think that we've done a lot of analysis beforehand and have determined that the food scraps program, at least in the business sector, is a good program and a sustainable program, but we can definitely talk more about that through this process.
Yeah, and it's not my intention to try to debate that with you here. Would like to at some point, I'd
love to,
and how it works with conversion technology and
sure.
anaerobic digestion and all the other fun stuff I'm learning about lately. But I would like to say, though, in the discussion about scoping for the consultant, because obviously if you bid out, if you put an RFP out for the process, and we are going to continue this program, obviously that's one set of circumstances. If our program is modeled more after what they're doing in the county, that's a different set of circumstances. And I would think before we went forward with the contract, we'd want to know, at least of this body, how we'd like to proceed with that. Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Leif. Is that right?
Leif Izzet and Mr. Izzet.
Hi. Have you worked with, and one of the things that I appreciated and have talked about in the previous meetings was having a limited number of competitors, thinking that, and I appreciate Mr. Armstrong's comment that the marketplace is a key player here. But I wanted to ask you if you had worked with the three companies that the county had chosen to compete, Allied and Waste Management, and I guess Marburg is the smallest fish, so that might not be quite not a national player. But have you worked with the other?
Yeah, I'm familiar with all three of them. I've done projects for clients, public agencies that had each one of those three companies elsewhere. So I'm very familiar with all three of them.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
There's a fourth one, I think, in Carpinteria, right? It's like Gold Coast. Harrison.
Harrison, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I share some of Mr. Rouse's concerns on this. We just recently had to ask for some money back from the haulers because the food scrap program and the revenue structure that was created for that program by a consultant turns out not to be working. A rather large shortfall, actually. And we're extremely fortunate that the haulers decided to kick in some money after the fact, but that was our miscalculation. So I believe, and I share Mr. DeForest's concern that our trash problems are not that different than the County of Santa Barbara's trash problems. We're using the same facilities ultimately. I think there is a great deal of overlap, or there should be a great deal of overlap. I think at a minimum, the county's RFP should be a starting point. And if we need to modify something, I would like to know why. And I believe that, I also agree with Mr. Rouse, that we have a fundamental question here. I mean, it seems, based on recent evidence, that the food scrap program has some real problems. And I want to know whether I want to discuss that. I want to see whether this council wants to continue with the program. It's my understanding, based on what you've told me, Mr. Samario, that the county has the same diversion rate that we do. So it's not as if the county is not meeting its responsibilities. And looking at these recently negotiated contracts that the county has done and that Goleta has done, they're getting better services for their ratepayers and lower rates. So I think we as a council need to sit down and determine what is it exactly that we're asking for. And I would like to have this debate about the value of the food scrap program. I think that's a debate that we need to have before we hire a consultant. Now, regardless of how we go forward, we will need a consultant because we don't have the in-house expertise to do this. I realize that, and that will happen. But it might happen for a variety of reasons. I think we need to be clear as a council about what it is exactly that we envision this consultant doing for us. What services do we desire? How different, if at all, are those services going to be from what the county does? I mean, ultimately, we might decide, and I don't know how the county feels about this, but we might decide, hey, we could subcontract this to the county. They've already been through this. They know the situation on the ground today. Why do we have to start over and do this from the beginning? So I believe I will not support the staff recommendation today. I believe that what we need to do is to decide exactly what it is that we want in terms of solid waste services, and in particular, whether we want to continue with the food scrap program before we hire a consultant. And then we want to be very clear about what it is, if anything, that is different about trash hauling in the city of Santa Barbara and trash hauling in the county of Santa Barbara. Because I don't think the differences are that great, or at least they shouldn't be. Anyway, that's where I stand.
Ms. Self.
Thank you. Well, sitting here and talking, hearing the consultant, I came to exactly the same conclusion as Mr. Rouse and Mr. Francisco. We have the cart before the horse. We're walking in not knowing what we need or what we want, and that's really our fault because we're supposed to be the policy directors, and I think this deserves one whole session with the what am I saying? But to see the menu. We don't know the menu. Being on the sustainability committee, there is great enthusiasm for rolling out food scraps to residents. Well, around 50% of our residents have one can. And they're talking about raising the can rate so that they can support the food scraps that will go in a green container that you have to buy a special decomposable bag. Now, who's going to do that? I mean, it's wishful thinking. But I think we need to get the menu and select a la carte what we think we want, and I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Francisco that why are we that different? Here we have to have so much staff that bills and manages and does. You know, this might be a big change for us because, looking at here, we're talking about an over 6% rate increase on our poor beleaguered citizens. And I didn't understand billing from container improvements. Right now, the bill comes and you have how many trash cans, and that's what it is. So upgrading a computer system to tell you that you had, and somebody's got a log, well, let me see, I only picked up one this time, but you're still billed for two. Or, the complexity, just let's get back to basics. We don't need to be that complex about things. And I do understand that the trash hauling business now is much more than just picking up your used cans and glass and dumping it in a landfill. But I think we're trying to build a Rolls-Royce here, and I don't think that's necessarily called for. We don't have to be at the leading edge experimenting with our residents on every single thing and new idea that comes down the pike, because we're making them pay for it. So I think we just need to get real. Again, I wholeheartedly agree. Let's know what we're asking for. Then we know what should be in the RFP. And then go forward with consultants. And maybe the consultant needs to tell us what that menu could be. But I can't support this as it is. Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Staff, how would you respond to the comments of Mr. Francisco and Ms. Self?
Yeah, I would say that the first stage of the process that we are contracting with the consultant for is to work with you to determine what you want.
Okay.
And that is, it's where you're sort of saying we need to determine what we want and then bring a consultant on board. Our idea was bring a consultant on board to help you determine what you want, then we put it in the RFP, and to have the support of the consultant in working with you in determining what you want.
Okay. And the food scrap program that Mr. Francisco was questioning, can you tell me a little? I mean, I know what it is, but where do we stand on that? Do we have billing problems?
One thing that I would say is there's two issues. One is composting our food scraps, collecting it separately in the commercial sector, and composting it rather than taking it to the landfill cost effective. And then there is, have we designed the business rates at a level that can recoup the costs of that program? And I think, and maybe Mr. Samario can expand on this, but it is cost effective to collect the food scraps separately and dispose of them. It's cheaper to dispose of them the way that we're disposing of it. Plus, it doesn't go into the landfill. We're not creating long-term needs to maintain that landfill once it's closed for those that debris.
Okay.
But whether the rate structure has been designed to appropriately, because we did put in new incentives, collect enough money to support the services from the business sector is a separate issue. Bob, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Hotchkiss. Just kind of by way of background, about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, is when we embarked on this desire to implement food scraps in the business sector. It was at that time, and to this day, I think it's the low-hanging fruit in the business sector. When you look at their diversion rates, it's pretty low, and when you look at what their makeup is in terms of the waste characteristics, a large portion of what they're generating and being buried is food scraps. So we felt that we had an opportunity to make a big dent in how much was being buried in our landfill, because it's more expensive to do so than any other alternative. So we worked with a consultant to develop a rate model that will help us to predict what kind of behavioral change would occur over a period of time, to what extent would businesses participate in this program. And we had to make a number of assumptions about how many people were going to be involved, how many businesses, how many tons would be diverted, what the implications were to the haulers who would have to create new routes and be shifting what they're picking up from one container or another. So we did all those analyses and built that into the model. And as we've talked about before, the rate model, we did some sensitivity analyses. In other words, we said, well, if we're assuming we're going to achieve in the first year, let's say 7% diversion, what would happen if we were grossly wrong, whereas we were achieving more diversion, for example. Let's say we achieved 15% diversion, which would be incredibly great, because that means we were more successful than we thought we'd be. And the analysis showed that whether we did double what we thought we were or half of what we thought we would do, that the range in terms of the impacts of revenues would be somewhere in the order of $100,000 at either direction. In other words, if we were wrong greatly, the implications from a revenue perspective were not going to be that great. That's what the model indicated. So now we are in a situation where we have in the business sector, the revenues have been climbing, particularly in the last couple of years, but in the last year particularly, while this program has been implemented and transitioning in, but it also was occurring at a time when the economy really hit us. And so we know that there are some impacts on those revenues just naturally because of the economy. And what we are not sure about is whether the loss in revenues, or to what extent this loss in revenues, and as Mr. Francisco indicated, is a material amount. It's not inconsequential. How much of that would have occurred anyway, independent of the rate study and changes we made to the rates, just because of the economy. We were seeing a really substantial trend, a negative trend in those revenues in the business sector well before we implemented new rates. We were seeing that same level of decline. And the rates, what it did was it actually created initially additional revenues because it did penalize those who didn't participate, and it took a while for those businesses to get on board, and then we saw a reduction in those revenues. But all it did was, in our opinion, it had a neutral impact. We believe that to a large extent the business rate study and the rates that we've established had a neutral impact on a trend line that was already occurring and has continued to occur. So we don't know what the answer is. That was part of what our charge was over the last few months, is to do more analysis, work with the haulers, look at the data, go back and see what was happening before the new rates took effect, and see if we can identify those trends and see what is the real cause and to what degree of the current loss of revenues. I don't know for sure that it was because of an inaccurate rate model. I have to think that more of it has to do with the economic trends or impacts, but I don't know for sure. So I don't know what the reason is for those loss of revenues. I know it's one of three factors, and we're not sure what those proportions are, and that's what we have to figure out. So anyway, that's in response to the issue of the food scraps program. But as Ms. Schmidt indicated, generally speaking, you know, what we're paying to dispose of or at least convert it to compost currently is $55 per ton, including transportation, and to bury that same material will be, starting July 1, $72 per ton. So from the ratepayer's perspective, it's a much more cheaper, it's a cheaper way to process the material, at least to bury it or to dispose of it. There are some collection costs that are incrementally, that we know are more than they were before, but we believe that the rates provided for that and built those into the assumptions. And again, I just don't know what the real loss of revenues is caused by.
Ms. Self spoke of some idea of transferring that or including that in a residential collection. Is that in the offing somewhere? Or?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, we have not at this point made any steps toward pursuing a food scraps program in the residential sector. That's going to involve a lot more discussion because of the implications to the conversion technology project we're working on. We're still evaluating those proposals. We're not sure that's going to work. There's some economic impacts of doing so there that really may make that really impractical to do so, but we're still looking at that as an option, whether to migrate to that residential sector or not, but that's not been decided yet.
But that would be a public discussion and come before the council.
Before the Sustainability Committee and council, for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, frankly, I think this is a complex subject, and I think, honestly, I hear the concerns of my fellow council members, but I think in some senses we're micromanaging where we're not quite sure what we're doing. So that's actually why I would like to bring a full-paid consultant on. I learned early from Peter Uberoth that the Olympics, one advantage of paying more is you got to really jerk the chain. And, that's a sort of nasty image. But what he's saying is you really control the situation, and I think that's correct. So I would support what staff has said here, just because I think otherwise, while we're being penny wise, we ultimately might be pound foolish. Thank you.
I will reiterate, and we can have the debate about the value of food scraps, but personally I think that there's a difference between composting food scraps versus taking the landfill. There's that issue and the value of that, and then there's the rate structure issue, and I think they really need to be separated out. And I can tell you a lot of restaurants and businesses who have come to me saying how much they like it and appreciate it and like the idea that their food scraps are becoming compost for something useful. And I think that's a good thing. We need to make sure that, assuming we keep it and move forward or do anything different with it, that it's financially sustainable, so we're not asking the haulers to backfill a gap in the funding, or certainly or to set up a situation where others' rates go up dramatically. So that is something that I think we need to figure out, which I assume would be part of the negotiations if food scraps is still part of our RFP process. One other question, and some other lights are on too. I agree with Mr. Francisco in the sense of why not use, looking regionally, and why not use the county RFP as a baseline and figure out, and maybe that instead of a blank piece of paper, use something that's very fresh, that worked well, and use that as part of the analysis of what should go into an RFP, and then debate whether things should be added or things should be taken away or modified. But to use that as a baseline. I'm not there saying the county should take over the city's trash department, but that's another conversation for another time. But I think there is value in that, especially as we move forward with the Tahiguas landfill reduction of trash at Tahiguas and converting it or doing whatever it is that the high and actually one of the proposals that's come in, and this has been in public meetings, might include composting as a component of it. So I think that's what you were saying, Mr. Samario. So there might be some good regional solutions here. But I think having that as part of it, which might save us some time and money here. And so they went through a year and a half of putting their RFP together, and we could probably save a whole lot of time if we use it as a baseline there. So I also the other piece of all the how many bidders are we going to get, or how many bids will we get? I know, Mr. Wiley, you've been looking into this, looking at the charter section. The way I understand what you are telling us about the charter is that there are two components. One is you have to publicly announce your intention to negotiate and award a franchise. However, when you send out that RFP, we have a wide range of latitude in terms of what the qualifications are in that RFP. So it's not like we have to say come one, come all. We have to say we're going to do a competitive process, but this is the criteria in which you can actually compete as part of that competitive process. So one I guess my question is, couldn't one component of putting in the RFP be something like a hauler who has had some recent experience within Santa Barbara County hauling trash, which would in and of itself limit it to 4. I mean, it's competitive, it's 4, it's connected. It would make sense in terms of a nexus to what we do here in Santa Barbara County, as opposed to getting 20 different ones from LA coming aboard. But if we chose to, couldn't that be one of the criteria that we could put in an RFP?
Madam Mayor, just to be clear, you, I think, correctly summarized my explanation of what I think the charter requires on this. So that's correct. And the answer to your second question is yes. But I guess it gets back to this free market point. I really hear two separate discussions. There's one about the substance of the RFP and a consultant possibly advising us on the substantive points of the RFP. But the other is the free market, the competitive process, and being open to that as the charter requires. And why wouldn't we do that? And then to get to your question, yes, we can establish, though, within that open competitive process, certain qualifications. Now, they can be black and white, yes, no. If you don't have it, you don't even bother submitting a proposal because you don't have any experience in Santa Barbara County. But again, the question, I think, is why would we do that?
Right. Well, and I think that's a policy question as part of the process we would answer.
Because you could also weight it. You could say, well, that's maybe gets you 5 points, and 5 points is a lot, but it wouldn't disqualify you necessarily just because you've only been operating in Ventura County.
Okay. Right. And I guess my point being is we have that much latitude when we put together the RFP to allow us, so we can get to a point where we can allow for competition without going just for anyone who wants to come in and submit something because they're interested. I mean, I think we have that was my point. So I think moving forward, that's going to be a key piece to us. This I guess for me at the end, the number, I understand we need a consultant. I think all of us agree up here. It's just the process of getting there. And I still have a concern, unless I can be alleviated of that concern, of the part in the contract in front of us of, there are these extra qualifiers in here, and I know the intention is to keep within 110,000, or even in Plan B of 55, but then you'd have to come back to us anyway. I don't want to get to the point where we're 90% done with the project and we used up the money and say, oh, well, now we need more. And so if we're going to do a contract, I want to do a contract and know what it is that we're paying for, and not let it creep up and up and up. And just the language on page 9 in the fee estimate gives me that angst there. So that's part of my concern there. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to put a word in on the composting, and that is that I've had a visit with Mr. Samario, and I've been to a couple of the regional trash meetings, and the whole issue of Tahiguas as is one of there's an unfunded liability piece that goes with Tehiwas. We're going to be managing that facility for a very, very long time and paying for it. So to the extent that we're reducing what we're putting into it, our liability going forward for the next generation will be less. And so I look forward to that conversation, and I hope that we're all looking at this, as I know we will, as the long-term costs, not just, okay, I'm saving a penny today. We want this, the long-term cost is a key ingredient there.
Mr. House?
You know, so I want to share with staff what's been sort of driving some of the questions and concerns that I have, because you've heard me ask a number of questions, and number one, it's not to do what I hope I'm not hearing a desire on the part of some of my fellow council members to turn the clock back and have us lose ground that we have gained over these years in terms of sustainability, in terms of resource efficiency, in terms of actually getting more value for the ratepayer's buck from a variety of angles. One of them is environmental. Another one literally is better services. I mean, you can all remember the day when we had to separate everything in those little boxes on the curb, and it was really quite a challenge for anybody when we were first trying the recycling thing. And now we have, in your side yard, backyard, pickup, and we've got the commingled recycling, and we've got the green waste, and we've got, all this amazing service that's offered to our community that's much more user-friendly than ever before, and is actually meeting a whole bunch of goals all at once. One of which is our diversion rate is significantly higher over time, and I think that we're on the right track. So number one, one of my concerns about this nationwide kind of search, and I think it's a pitfall, I don't know how to protect against it except for really a well-crafted RFP, is that we could get somebody in here very easily from that wide search who would offer us very, very low rates and perhaps meeting some of the criteria of some of my fellow colleagues here, de minimis service that gives us none of the benefits that we have right now and that barely meets the minimum threshold for service, but because somehow it's that low bid, somehow it's that super low cost or something, that we would be obligated somehow to accept their bid. That's a pressing concern for me. We have two haulers right here in the city of Santa Barbara who have been competing with one another, even though they have the two separate areas. They're trying to outdo each other all the time, and we've been getting pretty great service from them. I want to build on that success, not set us up for losing that ground. Even to the point of when I talk about the idea of a subcommittee, I appreciate the county having had that opportunity for some elected participation throughout the process. It was to be a guardian for the achievements that we've made, not to have the elected piece of the process come in and start stripping away some of these benefits and some of these amazing achievements, including the food scrap program, which I know Mr. Rouse participates in, and most of our restaurateurs that are using this are delighted with. Please, while I'm asking these questions, please offer me some reassurance that what you're proposing doesn't put us in a situation where we would be undoing some of the gains that we've got just because somebody comes in with this low-cost option somehow, that we would be obligated to hit this minimum level of service and roll the clock back and lose ground.
I think that, again, this is the very early part of the process. We're hoping to bring a consultant in to help you make decisions on what criteria do you want to set for proposers. Do you want to limit based on people in who have provided service in the county? Do you? And so that's yes. Those are going to be decisions that the Sustainability Committee or the full council, however you direct us, are going to make. We haven't made those decisions yet. You'll make those.
Madam Mayor, again, You, as a body, are in charge of the process. That's the bottom line. We're going to open it up, but once we get those proposals, the evaluation process, or even the front end, determining the criteria, you're in charge of that process. So I just can't imagine us picking somebody that, in the end, isn't going to meet the needs of the city, whether it's a low price or not. It's not based on price. Ultimately,
Wait, explain that again. We're obligated to take the low responsibility.
Absolutely
okay.
not.
I guess I mentioned that last time, and now I'm just give me that reassurance.
We're not purchasing, under our purchasing ordinance, we have for ordinary goods and services, we have to go with low bid, or even public works contracts. But in this kind of a service, low price is just going to be one of many criteria we're going to be applying to determine who's going to best meet the needs of the city.
Because so far, the innovation that we've seen from each of the haulers has resulted in better service and better value for the ratepayer. And we've gotten broader range of service that actually meets long-range goals of diversion and reducing what's happening at the landfill, which returns back again to the ratepayer.
Right. So all those things you value, we can build into the process.
Okay. So, having a consultant to me, is critically important. Somehow getting the RFP right is critically important. I know that's what you're trying to offer us today. I agree with the mayor that we need to really have some kind of a cap on what could become. I respect your opinion that there's not going to be that many that apply that would qualify, especially if our RFP is crafted properly. On the other hand, there is that danger, and I appreciate the offer, and maybe we need to negotiate that to really get some sort of a real cap. We said $110,000. That's a real cap, meaning it would have to come back to us. If it were to want to go higher, would we be obligated to go higher based on the contract that we have here?
I have to chuckle a little bit because if you recall, the original contract we brought you was higher and it had money for these contingencies. And then because of the council's concern about the cost, we cut the contingencies out, feeling that we could live within it. And if we only got the 4 bidders, if we got more than that, we would then have to figure out a way where staff would do more work. Somehow we're in the process to keep it down within the 110. So we were trying to meet the council's desire to cut the cost down, or the potential cost.
Okay.
And I think we feel that we can do that within the 110,000. But when you do a not to exceed, we have to come back to you. We can't just give the contract.
And not after the fact, but it'd be...
It's part of the process.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, just
Mr.
on
Wiley.
that point, because I've seen problems with this over the years, and the city attorney's office now has a standard professional services contract, which we insist on. The city attorney's office has to sign off approval as to form, and we won't sign anything but our standard contract. And it has a clause that says not to exceed X dollars without the express written approval of the city council of the city of Santa Barbara. We insisted on changing it to be real clear because we had a dispute, you may recall, with the design of the Granada Garage, where they said, this person told us, no problem, don't worry about it, just go ahead and keep working. And we said, no, it's got to be approved by the city council.
Okay, thank you. One little wrinkle. I just want to. Doesn't McDonald's opt out of our system? Aren't there some of the commercial ventures here in Santa Barbara who are not mandatorily participating? They've somehow been able to leave our system, and is leakage like that something we need to take into consideration? That's why I brought up the mandatory issue earlier.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, I'm not aware of, I personally am not aware of any businesses that have opted out. I'm aware of one residence that we granted an exemption to pursuant to the city code.
Okay.
And this has been brought up to me by staff before. There is a process to opt out of trash hauling services, and McDonald's is the one that has. They do have food scraps, though, oddly enough. So they do have some collection, but they do haul their own trash, as they do at most of their restaurants. And they applied for a special exemption for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
So it's mandatory, but you can opt out.
And we have the one that does.
Okay. I'm hearing. Well, we need to. I'm hearing a split vote one way or another here. So, I guess the question. I'm not quite sure which way it's going to go. If we're not moving forward with what's ahead of us, I guess the question is. I don't want to have this type of meeting every month for the next 6 months just to have the meeting. So I think we need it, why don't we try going somewhere? And I don't know if staff, if you want to, you've heard comments from us about how we can actually move forward instead of going in circles here. Do you have any suggestions?
My suggestion is, I think that the next step in this process, whether we have a consultant helping us or we don't have a consultant helping us, is to determine what services we want, what you want to see as far as services to the community and as far as the design of the process. And so we can go forward either without consultant services to that next step or with consultant services helping us along that way.
Okay. Mr. Rouse, do you want to try something?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think what I'm hearing up here is that I think all of us agree that consultant services are going to be needed on some level. No doubt about it. My concern was whether or not we're going forward with the correct information to develop the right kind of RFP that was going to ring true for the potential contractor. Like Mr. House said, we need to build on the success of the 2 haulers we've had here. I can't imagine anybody out-competing Allied or Marburg, frankly, but who knows who's going to bid. I'm not that worried about the number of bidders coming through. We have a common interest with the county about Tahigas. I think they're just concerned about conversion rates and the capacity of the landfill as we are. And what I want to hear, what I want to know factually, is that what they're doing and what we're doing and what the results are. Right now, with the conversion technologies, I understand it going forward, we may not be in the right direction. There may be a better way. Maybe it's a wash, maybe our way is better, but I need to know that before we tell our hauler what it is we want them to do and what we want them to perform. Mr. Houseman talking about the different services we've had over the time. We had the boxes, we had this, we had that. Yeah, we've changed a lot of times over the years. And every time we do that, we make up a new set of containers, we make up a new set of policies, and we put out we have more efforts and more pickups for the haulers. We need to reduce the number of hauler trips, we need to create the best efficiencies we have, and we need to do whatever it takes to make Tahigas last as long as we possibly can. Those are all common goals. Those are not different from the county and the city. I'd love to be able to get the input from both Mr. Schleck and Mr. Samario in a, let's go have lunch. I mean, just to find out what's going on. We don't need to debate this here, but I really would like to know this information before moving forward. We're making some assumptions that certain policies are creating better environments. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that those things are working, but we may have some factual information that's going to help us go forward to create the situation where we do get the best service for the best price, not necessarily the lowest bidder, but the best thing for the community in a sustainable way over the next 10 years. I think that's our job. And like I said, once again, I think the county and Goleta seem to have hit a home run according to what I see in the staff report. So I'd like to emulate that. I'd like to carry that forward and have our haulers compete for it and come up with the right solution and the right thing so we can go forward and not have to look for a new landfill.
Do you have a suggestion on how we end this topic here today?
Well, let me think about a motion.
Mr. House?
I think Mr. Rouse opened up something I like. The basic principles upon which we're operating we could very well just say some of them. Like the ones that he was just saying. First of all, building on the existing service. Nothing worse than. It's got to be equal or better. Consistent with, not in conflict with, consistent with, or benefiting from the county's RFP process. That was something the mayor had just mentioned a minute ago. How important that is that we actually take advantage of what they've already done and have and not reinvent a wheel. If some of that is something we can use, let's use it. The common goals that we have in terms of Tahigas, we all know that we have to continue to reduce what we put in there, and diversion rate needs to increase, but also the interest that we have in conversion technology. So somewhere in there is that common ground of wanting to learn or be flexible enough to adapt with the improved technology, too. We need a partner in that. So whomever we get, we want to make sure that we have that kind of a partnership with them, that they would be advancing the cause with us as we move along, not stuck in time, in some past time, but move forward. Those are principles that I think we could be very solid on as we develop the RFP with a consultant, with a cap how much we're spending for it, with a complete understanding with the public that we're not going to be just going for the lowest responsive bidder in that other way, that we're actually looking for value. We're looking for value that addresses ratepayers' concerns and meets our other goals that we have in the city. And for me, the other piece of that is that there be some subcommittee or some ongoing participation, whether it's a sustainability committee, but something sub-council meetings, so that there's an ongoing relationship with the council, that you get a chance to get some feedback and buy-in along the way. So those are, I'd have to listen to the tape to say them all again, but those are like common ground pieces that if I were to make a motion, I'd want to have that included in there. So staff, is that helpful? That kind of articulating what you've been hearing so far is kind of consensus points. Then I will make a motion for us today so we can discuss that to follow the staff's recommendation that we have in A and B with a not to exceed of $110,200 and please, Susan, you're going to have to listen to the tape because I won't remember those 4 points, but you all heard them. That those are common ground principles that we operate on, and including a subcommittee of the council of some sort, either the sustainability committee or a subcommittee that we form specially for the purpose.
There's a second. I don't think there might be a second because I don't know if we know what the motion is.
Shall I do it again then, or maybe we have it repeated?
Well, good luck there. Yeah,
Okay.
Mr. House, to be honest, I'm not quite sure what your motion is because it was a long kind of list of things. So maybe if you can consolidate it.
All right, specifically, A and B in the recommendation to council with these specific items. One, that the RFP build on our existing contract that we have right now, that it's something equal to or better, so we move up from that. That we utilize what we can learn from the county's process, RFP process, to the maximum extent that we can, and that we that we find common goals with our partner in the county, the diversion rates, the use, and that we have a partner in the new technology with whomever we select. So those are the 4 things. They're all kind of together. That's what I'm asking for my motion. Oh, in the subcommittee.
Yeah.
I guess it is. To me, it doesn't matter what form it takes. It's either the sustainability committee, if you all want it, or another committee. But we have some representative group from the council participate in the RFP process.
There's a second.
That's clear, right? Okay.
There's a second.
Second.
Okay. Ms. Self, I'm sorry, you've had your light on for quite a while.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify something that it sounds like Mr. House feels I'm wanting to step backwards, and that's not what I mean. I have never proposed that we do not continue on our route, but I have continually said, though, is we don't need to always be the first one in the pack experimenting on our city, and that I would expect to have some sort of examples of success somewhere, and we're hearing different things about the food scraps. So having, say, something like that in an RFP when it hasn't been fully vetted, I think would add to the cost that's something that may never be implemented. And I still think Mr. Francisco's suggestion that how different is the county than us? And we regularly hear issues about the hauling contract at the Sustainability Committee. And one of the things we are going to be compelled and impelled to move forward in this all the time because of state mandates, because of it's the right thing to do. So nobody is saying go backwards and bury a hole of trash in your backyard. But I think there are a few things to be ferreted out before we decide what goes in that RFP. And since we're going to do it that way, I could support it as long as we do this in a sensible way.
Okay. Okay, so as I understand the motion, it's to recommend A and B as in the staff report not to exceed 110,200, and that's a big part of it. There are 4 specific directions as part of the process. One is to build, the RFP will build on the successes of the existing contracts that some form of a council subcommittee, it might be the sustainability committee or might be another subcommittee, will be an integral part of the process and be an integral part of the process, that we will utilize whatever the county did in terms of their process as much as possible in terms of determining how we get to that RFP and the process that they used. And the last one, it was to make sure that what we put together is still in line with regional concerns, especially as it relates to Tahiguas and the conversion technology proposal process. Was that that
That's
one?
correct. And I had.
So it's not counter to that regional proposal.
Those common goals. And there was one other piece, and that was, and I said that whomever we select, there be I call it like a partner in innovation, that we actually that we're working together. I think that's an important criteria, that it's not a fixed moment in time, but we actually have a dynamic.
Are you suggesting that we get hauler input? Because I don't think that is as part of the.
That's maybe a better way of saying it, but I'm talking about part of the RFP is that we include as a general principle that we actually select someone who will work with the city ongoingly for innovation and for improvement to the process. Just common ground, very important thing for all of us.
Hauler input was good because that's exactly what the county had in theirs.
Yeah, the hauler. I think
Okay.
that is incorporated.
If
How
hauler
the
input
county
is
did it, I thought worked very well in terms of, I think, the spirit of what you're talking about, having the haulers participate in giving feedback early on before the RFP is put together.
And after they're selected. I mean, honestly, it's input.
Hold on, stop there. If you got almost 7, don't go for 3. Okay, so.
I take your coaching, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Questions on the motion? Question, Mr. White.
I am not clear on Mr. Francisco's concern on this. So I would appreciate hearing a repeat of that concern.
My concerns are pretty simple. I think that we have an existence proof that these RFPs can be done in current conditions in this county, and they can be done well, and they've just been done by 2 different entities. How different are we? And that's why, and I think the mayor agrees with me on this, that the county's RFP, that should be our starting place. We do not need to start with a blank slate.
Is that not in the motion at this point?
I hope so.
You think so?
I think we can make clear when Mr. House said when the county process, utilize the county process when possible means use that initial RFP process as a baseline.
It's exactly what I mean, and it's supposed to address the concern that was raised by Mr. Francisco.
I'm going to ask
if I can just finish. And my other concern is that we have, we've recently, after having hired another consultant to tell us how to come up with the right rate structure for the food scrap program, all of a sudden we're $500,000 short, and we have to go back to the haulers and beg for money from them, raise the rates to the ratepayers. To say that makes me uneasy is to understate things, okay? And so it's really, really important that I think that we minimize the differences between our solid waste program and the regional programs around us. And I say that we can be totally consistent and environmentally sound in doing that. You know, I don't think that the county's trying to cut corners. They've got an excellent diversion rate. And we need to make sure that we're not implementing programs to be special and different. We want to implement things that will be effective, and one of the most effective things I think that we can do is work together with our regional partners. And if that means making all of our programs almost exactly alike, fine.
Appreciate that clarification. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, I believe that's 6-1, is that right? Okay, thank you. Council, do you want to take a quick break or keep going? Okay, we have one more item. Thank you very much, Mr. Schleich in particular, for being here today. Thank you. Item number 9.
Request from Council Members Rouse and Self regarding the Employee Mortgage Loan Assistance Program.
Okay, this is an item, we're missing one up. Mr. Rouse, if you could come back up. Item from 2 council members, and there was a Finance Committee meeting on this topic. So usually when 2 council members bring something up, I'd like to invite them to say some introductory remarks, but then I guess Mr. Samario, since this, or maybe Mr. Francisco, since this went to Finance, get that, and then figure out where we go from here. Is that so? Ms. Self, would you like to start?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What spurred my curiosity about this program was that it was proposed to expand the employee loan mortgage loan program in our general plan, and so that curiosity led me to find this, and I want to make it very clear 2 points. One is that I think that when this program was adopted in 2002, that it was done with the best of intentions, and nobody was trying to fly under the radar or do some special secret deal. It was passed by the council and mayor at the time, and that was fine, and especially the employees who have been made very uncomfortable about that. I am deeply sorry for that, because they certainly did nothing wrong. It is a wonderful deal, and so taking advantage of it, they did nothing wrong. And the reason that Councilmember Rouse and I are bringing it forward is because this is the only way in our processes to deal with it, and for us as a council to decide, is this a program that should go forward or should it be eliminated? What is the condition of this, or should it be, as our general plan suggests, should we put more money into it? Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, Ms. Self said it all. It was a program that when it was initiated, I wasn't particularly critical of it. However, it did seem like we were setting aside a separate class of individual, or at least it seemed to be at the time, realizing that sometimes in the private sector it does happen, and it certainly happens in other municipalities, but when you're using taxpayer money, there is a different standard, I believe, that should be used. So once again, it's not a matter of going back and wagging our finger at the past or the staff or the employees. It's more a matter of saying from this point forward, I think that we should eschew these kind of programs and not go forward and try to emulate a bank or to do whatever it takes to put employees in place. I did agree at the time that the idea of doing public safety employees and having them in the community as opposed to outside of the community, if they so chose, was a worthy thing to do. I don't know how effective that really was, but once again, since the program is essentially tapped out anyway, Ms. Self and I would agree that a continuation of the program is not needed at this time.
Thank you.
And we can make a motion unless you'd like some discussion.
Well, I think Mr. Samario had some comments, unless, or Mr. Francisco from, what? Mr. Francisco, as Chair of Finance, because this went to you as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And there'll be public comment before we make any motion.
This item came before the Finance Committee a couple weeks ago, and Mr. Samario gave us an excellent presentation summarizing the history of this program. As Mr. Rouse said, many businesses, other cities, the University of California had programs similar to this, and the council 10 years ago, when they enacted this program, it was not a novel idea. It was something that they saw elsewhere and copied. Unfortunately, this is not the first time the city has tried to encourage the retention of essential employees with programs that turned out to be failures. We've also tried to do subsidized housing for public safety employees. That didn't work either. Anyway, this would appear to be, and when this fund ran out of money 2 or 3 years ago, Mr. Armstrong realized that it was highly unlikely that the council was going to devote more funds to it, so he didn't bother asking for it. And I think at this point, I mean, the program is obviously moribund. The only question remaining is, as Mrs. Self pointed out, it's called out in the general plan to continue this, and I think we want to make it clear it was the unanimous opinion of the Finance Committee that we should formally end this program, just so there's no doubts about that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn it to public comment because Kate Smith, if you'd like to come on up.
Mayor Schneider, members of the Santa Barbara City Council, self-evaluation or in-house investigations, especially in the face of allegations of corruption, would be folly. Please call for a grand jury investigation, a federal grand jury investigation of the loan program, the gang task force, leadership councils, executive council, coordinating council, and the school to prison pipeline. You will find deep-seated and widespread school and government corruption, specifically misallocation of tens of millions of dollars of public money. I was reported in The Independent by Nick Welsh as a citizen crusader. One of the council members refused to listen to my allegations and treated me with contempt. I've just spent 3 hours listening to you figure out whether or not you should pay $110,000 to a consultant for jobs and expertise that we already pay a government staff.
You wind up, please.
Truth will out, justice prevails, and love conquers all in an eternal conflict against humorless arrogance, illusory prestige, brute force, and primeval stupidity.
Okay, that concludes public comment. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Finance Committee discussion on the loan program was very enlightening, and one of my main worries had been the loss of reserves, of our rainy day reserves, and I was looking for the relationship between that, our loss of those rainy day reserves, and this program. There's some overlap of dates there, and I think that there was at least a modest amount of money that came out of reserves that dipped when they dipped below our policy quantities. However, the bulk of the program, it seemed to me, was funded consistent with our reserve policy. It was early enough, and our reserves were up, and there were, as I recall, there were $1 million and then another $1 million increment set aside and used for the program. In any case, the bulk of the money was consistent with our reserved policies. Where I had, and then I know one of the other areas where I felt that people are raising concern now is that the interest rate that the city is receiving on the money is so low, and we know that if a bank were making that loan, that they would have put a floor under the percentage rate that were paid. So there are pieces of the loan program that show up as weaknesses now. But I think that also when we look back on it, we gained 3 strong department heads. So there are pieces in there as well, which, and as Mr. Rouse was saying, safety personnel, there are some safety personnel in the list who are living in the area where, for example, when the La Conchita slide occurred, we were looking for safety personnel that could get here, and that became Santa Barbara can become isolated in seismic events, as an example, and also big flood events. So there are pieces of this program that I see the logic of the thinking, and I appreciate that the program's tapped out now, but may Santa Barbara end up, and I also want to say that as I read the general plan is not saying this is going to happen, and it never did. There are menus of things that might be considered, and that language has been worked on very hard to say this isn't necessarily going to happen. There are things that might be considered, the various loan programs. So. I came away from the review feeling that a better job was done than the initial brouhaha that occurred. I think that at the time Santa Barbara was outpricing that the people we had a really hard time hiring good folks here, and if that's I could see in 10, 20 years, we might be back in that. Not we, but our successors could be back in that position. I expect Santa Barbara to remain one of the great places in the world to live. And if we want top talent here, we may have to look back on, somebody may need to look back on this idea. As somebody said, on any given Tuesday, a council can make these kinds of decisions. But as I say, I certainly don't endorse continuing the program now, but I see the logic and the thinking of the folks at the time. I think Ms. Self talked about that, of the intentions were good and all of that. But I see the logic of the need to draft talent into the city, and we always want, and we're lucky to have excellent management and excellent staff, and I think this program brought in some folks that we're benefiting from today. So there's a positive side of this as well as the negative, and I just wanted to make a couple of those points.
Thank you, Mr. House.
Thank you. I want to concur with Mr. White's commentary, and I would defy anyone to say this has been a failure or that even that the program has not borne fruit. It has borne fruit, and it's been an appropriate gesture for a large organization like ours. We're not alone in that. There are other major organizations, even here in the South Coast, who at the time and continue to share our concern about recruiting and retaining qualified workers, and that quality housing for our workforce, and even at the time we stated it out loud, as a city, it was one of our very highest priorities, and that we would do what we could to, in a lot of ways, policy ways and other ways. And in this case, we had a chance to actually make a a direct impact on the lives of some of our precious workers and give them an opportunity they would not have otherwise had to live right here and to participate in the community that they work so hard for. So I think it was a wise decision to start this program and to extend it. I think it was also a wise decision not to continue to fund it and to let it go into its own remission as the economy slipped away from us. And I think that all those decisions all along the way, even the one of just letting it be right now, is appropriate. I don't like the idea of somehow saying we shall never do this again. I think that if we had the reserves, the economy was better, and the housing prices were continued to escalate beyond what any of our key workers were able to afford, and we could do something like this program again, I would like us to be able to do that. And I think it's I take some real. I'm happy that a city council in the future is not being have their hands tied from actually taking and making a judgment like that if they wanted to, because there may be a time where it would be appropriate for us to do that again. So I wasn't on the council when this was established, but I remember how strongly we worked on building our response to the housing crisis and addressing it directly on behalf of those people who work for us, and I think it has been a success. So just want to say that out loud. I won't support us doing away with, the language that was here, wanting to ensure that no new loans are made in the future. Well, they're not going to be made now anyway. I agree with Mr. Rouse. There's no money for it. We're not trying to keep it going right now. But I hope that we have that option when we get the chance in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting how context work. I remember when this item first came up before I was on the council. I was in a job in human resources, and in the early 2000s, the number one topic, whether it was if you were in a business or what happened in public governments like this one, was recruitment and retention, and the idea of workforce housing for firefighters, police, teachers, and nurses. Those were always the four entities that came up. And what can we do? And we couldn't, I remember you couldn't use low-income housing money for it because they made too much money. And so here was a situation which I think Councilmember Secord was one of the instigators of bringing this to the council at that point when and I think it was when Harriet Miller was leaving as mayor and before Marty Bloom came on, and moved forward from there. Here's the situation where we've seen other public entities like the universities, like Mr. Francisco said, do it, and it's a loan and we'll get the money back, as opposed to a grant or a subsidy. And so I get the need, the outcry. You looked at one, not only newspaper article after another, that was a big topic. It was a big topic in the Human Resources Association. Every luncheon I went to, that was one of the big topics. And even campaigns in 2001 was a big topic. Workforce housing for police, fire, nurses, and teachers. And so, fast forward several years later, we're in a totally different scenario where the economic downturn's gone down. The housing market is where we never thought it would have been in 2001. And in hindsight, there are some components of it that should have been sharpened. And there's no way we would today do what that council in 2001 and 2002 did. So, passing a motion saying we're going to formally stop this program is basically doing what we're already doing, but that's okay. I understand the message behind it. I guess for me, the unfortunate part of this whole process is not that the issue was brought to light, and that's fine. And let's look at, sunshine and look at what, all the policies are and how the city spends its money. What was unfortunate is how politicized it got through the press or people making assumptions, and how many pieces of misinformation went out that needed to get corrected, and that just created more question marks. And I'm not saying anyone up here did that or did that intentionally. It just happened that way, even to the point. And I think there's an article in one of the papers today that still lists the interest rate at 0.5%, which is correct today, but not what it was when it first started. And it still gives that impression. So when things like this come forward in the future, I hope we can look at, ask questions about why did that council do what it did? What was the implications? And, where are we today? And I watched that finance committee meeting, and really I thought it was a very good presentation, and I know we're not going to hear it now, but it is available on the city website if people want to see the full information. If you really want to get it, I think that was a really good conversation and presentation. So, those are my comments there. Ms. Self.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm no longer talking to that one reporter. You know, it's one thing to sort of misunderstand. It's another to totally twist, manipulate, and turn on its head. So I'm having a little hiatus from discussing things there. And I don't think there was any corruption involved in this program. I think you see how many meetings we have and all of this, and what do you see and how do you see? My disappointment was that being in Finance Committee and being here through budget hearings, that we didn't see this. And my suggestion at Finance Department was that anything in the general plan that has implications to a department, such as Finance Department or Waterfront or whatever, that it should go through the management and staff in that department to see, does this make sense? I think it would have come out then. And then when I asked why we hadn't seen it, legally, there's some legal issues about we can't make money on employees. I'm not expressing this quite right, but so it's considered an asset, not an investment. And then, it looks like we have one department head, but I sort of question how it was managed, and Mr. Samario is new, so he wasn't the one overseeing this at the time. But in reading through the resolution in the loan documents, it was for recruiting and retention. So I see here we have one department head, and then we have other employees as far as retention. Let me see, 18.7 years, 13.6, 20 years, 27.8 years, 30.4 years. So I think the intention of things, and I don't call it corruption. I think it's just, he came in and it's kind of nobody's really overseeing it the way it really intended to be. And I kind of get back to my common theme that you hear me say up here, what should government be doing? We are not lenders. Sorry, we're not. Lending institutions have certain rules and fiduciary responsibilities that they must follow by rules, regulations, and laws. And so when we start tipping into, we run a great airport, okay, and waterfront and many other things we do. I just question the wisdom, and I would like my colleagues here, when we get into areas, we don't underwrite insurance, of what should we be doing? And again, if you want to know the details of the loan, it's on the website, and I will just reiterate, the employees did nothing wrong, the city did nothing wrong, but I will say, if there's anything like this that we haven't been shown, please show us.
Mr. Rouse, did you have a motion or something that you want? Go ahead.
Madam Mayor?
Go ahead, Mr. Francisco.
I just wanted to point out that according to the council agenda report, we were supposed to hear a report.
Oh, okay.
And there's no recommendation of a motion, so
Thank you
no
for
notice
that.
to the public that we might have moved anything on this. So
Okay.
It could be an abbreviated report, right?
I think there's consensus with all seven of us that we have no intention to continue this program right now, and there's no money to do it anyway. So I think that is, and if there was any intention, it would have to come to us for a vote anyway. So I think that sort of says it loud and clear. Did you have something else, Mr. Rouse, or no? Okay. Mr. Armstrong, okay. Thank you for that clarification. And we are now moving on to, we have 2 closed session items. The other 2 have been taken off the agenda. If you'd like to read those.
Item 11, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation, and item 12, a public employee performance evaluation, Government Code Section 54957.
Thank you. Before you go, there's a public comment on item 12, which is the public employee performance evaluation. City Administrator, Ms. Smith.
Madam Mayor, members of the Santa Barbara City Council, I'd like to wait until they're attentive.
It's okay, we're listening.
But they're not, and they have been voted into office to listen.
They're listening. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Those who make democracy impossible make revolution inevitable. Because of time constraints, I'd like to refer you to the Daily Sound regarding the loan program. And it was the request from the Daily Sound about the loan program.
We've already moved on that item, so if this is about the closed session item you asked.
No, I'm sorry, you have to stop.
Okay, I'll stop the clock. I'll give you 5 more seconds, but you have to, it's to the closed session item that you're referring to.
Right, and we're
Okay.
talking about the city administrator. That would be Jim Armstrong.
Okay, I'm going to start the clock again. Go ahead.
Okay. So what we find is there's a Daily Sound article about the great economic divide. And there are hundreds of articles online to explain how our financial system and our government operations have become dysfunctional and extremely dangerous in that absolute power corrupts absolutely. You think it's fine to give out $4.8 million of the taxpayers' money, and he thinks it's fine to do a cover-up. So absolute power corrupts absolutely, and revolution is inevitable. The Brown Act, California Public Records Act, and Freedom of Information Act are useless. They're a farce now against a corrupt administration. Please investigate the refusal to keep the minutes of the Gang Task Force Leadership Council and the Executive Council, the Coordinating Council. I've tried 3 requests, California Public Records Act, to Mr. Armstrong for an accounting of the CalGRIP grant. Just the way he said, let's not respond to that. I got no response. And what we find is a spin. So please know you are on a world stage. I have
Please wind up.
an upcoming small claims court procedure against the government. There are many procedures against the schools, but truth will out. Justice prevails. Thank you very much.
That concludes public comment. We'll be adjourning from closed session.